need the trim. At least the hair's not long anymore. That's killing
what it is.
Yeah, the long hair's gone. Thank God. That was way out of hand. But yeah, the beard does need it.
Welcome in. I'm sorry, Terry, I didn't mean to step over you. You were explaining to me and Tyler about how the beard has changed, only the perception of which, because the hair is different. And clearly, like, we can't even focus on the deeper dive, Tyler in the house, NHA sponsoring the show, all these great things until we get past, because, you know, the stream's going to be like, wait a second, did Terry get a haircut? And then for the entire show, it's just going to be, did Terry get a haircut? No, I don't think he got a haircut. Did Terry get a haircut? Meanwhile, somebody's going to pop in late. They're not subscribed. They're not hitting the notification bell. They don't know when the deeper dive begins. And then they're going to say at like 35 past the hour, you know, it looks like Terry got a haircut, and derail everything that we've created. So that's why we can't begin. What's up, man?
What's going on, man? Yeah, that's it. We're nicely a little bit more groomed the last couple of weeks here. They during the pandemic, which was the reason that the hair was ever long in the first place, just didn't feel like sitting in a barber chair all with somebody all close to my face. Not that my barber gets his face like right here while he's cutting my hair necessarily, but like back over here or whatever. But I walked down to my barber shop finally, and they had turned it into a cafe during the pandemic, which I thought was a weird decision. Not exactly a business that's going to do any better. So I had to find a new barber, all that stuff. But yeah, everybody's obviously here for my grooming tips anyway. When you got a face like this, how could they not be?
Look, you know, El Negro's already coming in here. Notice the Terry haircut 2 days ago. See, we have El Negro Loco, the news god, on top of all the information as it comes. That just proves to the chat that we have the right person in that position if he's noticing stuff 2 days before the obvious.
That's it. Exactly. He noticed it. I'm sure he called it out at the time. And yeah, he's on the ball on top of everything that changes, even on a Saturday, which I think is his day off.
See, that's the thing. There's no days off when you're breaking news. You know that. Come on, never a day off. All right, Terry on Twitter, at DigitalB21, at Shander Show for me. I know you have a is that still the one, or is there another one I should be promoting? I feel like you have a couple of Twitter accounts, right?
I think I've got like T McB74, my name on the various DFS sites. I think I have that handle, but I don't do anything on that one. Digital
okay, so I'm promoting the right one, is basically.
Yeah,
okay, perfect. And as mentioned, Tyler is here in the house. Make sure you give him a shout on the chat. No House Advantage will tell you everything about NHA as we go deeper throughout this 10-game slate tonight. And look, you know, we're going to have a bunch of different games and angles to go through and talk about. I know the Phillies and Braves starting just a little bit earlier for us at the top of the hour. So live before lock with Greg and Gundacker will take you up to the actual lock tonight on this 10-game slate. And you know that I've come prepared, right, to put you on the spot with something movie related. And it's personal to me because it's based on a moment that I'm waiting and anticipating to have with my son, who is just over a month old now, that I'm probably not going to have with him for like another 3 years. But I saw a movie that brought me back to this moment that I'm expecting. Trust me, I know that's a lot of like gray area, but I'll fill it in. Basically, I create this stuff in my head, and then I put Terry on the spot at like quarter after each show, and he's scrambling to not only crunch his lineups, but also answer this movie question. Is that right? That's exactly right. Yeah, it makes it fun. And yeah, if anybody out there is wondering, we do not coordinate on those references before the shows. No. It's not in the run sheet, so it's always, it's a fun challenge. Get it off the top of the head. Makes it more interesting. Before we even look at the slate and how Terry approaches it tonight, we want to remind you what's free, and that's the MLB top pitchers, also the MMA fighter rankings as well. But really, for the purposes of our show, you want to make sure that you've already hit the like button, you're already subscribed, you hit the notification bell, right? So you're here early on time, you're not missing much, and then we go from there. You're using the MLB top pitchers tonight, at least, and then throughout. Awesemo plus $29.95 a week, so you don't have to wait. But at least now you know the top pitchers. So, all right, let's look at tonight. Just overall, we have a couple of things happening already. We have that one game starting at 6 with the Phillies and the Braves. But as far as the main slate tonight, what jumps out at you as kind of your approach? I think it's a fairly top-heavy pitching slate. It's an interesting pitching slate because there's a few guys up there. And when we're talking about the top options on the board, they're priced in a range from like 11.2 on FanDuel down to 9.5 for some of the premium options. You could even argue like Framber Valdez and Luis Castillo at 8,200 and 8,600 respectively belong in that conversation. Similar story in the price range on DK. And then to me, it just kind of falls off a cliff. There's not a lot of pitching I want to roster on the bottom end of this or from the value range. And I think there are some very, very attackable pitchers on the back end of this. So it's really all about getting to the right combination of the top end arms
and then maybe spreading out to some of these under-owned stacks. I think there's a few stacks, like I'd love to own the Reds today, but they're just so popular. We talked about it on the morning show that it's going to be difficult to roster them in any unique combinations while still getting to the premium pitchers. So you're walking a really thin line, or you're spreading out to very specific things. And I think I want to be on the one that's kind of spreading out and grabbing more of the potential range of outcomes on this slate.
So just to follow up on FanDuel, where you clearly have to roster the one pitcher, does it make it a little tougher, or do you just have to be a little more discerning with where you're spending the money, since you may not go top heavy for pitching, or does that change everything, your approach, knowing that you can't get away with a cheaper option as a P2?
Yeah, I mean, you do have that difficulty on FanDuel where we're only getting that one shot at it with that pitcher spot. On DK, you get a little bit of offset in that you can kind of miss on one of them. They still need to turn in a reasonably good performance for you, but if you get that apex performance from your other guy, he might be able to bolster it enough. Whereas on FanDuel, if you whiff on your pitcher, that lineup's pretty much dead in the water. I mean, at times you can get it where it's carried up, but on a slate like this, for that to happen, you need most of the pitching to go pop, right? You need it to be like a 5-game slate where 8 out of the 10 guys are just terrible, and then your okay pitching score can be fine, and then everything gets bolstered by bats. Slate this size, that's just not going to happen, particularly with the high-end pitching options available. So somebody's going to be really good. It's going to be a matter of identifying that guy and rostering the hell out of him on FanDuel.
By the way, you're already 1 for 1. Just so you know, News God is off today, so your home run prop should be right online on the money, and everything else you've got off to the right foot.
Can't get something like that wrong. I do have some overview on his schedule, and we were talking about his schedule, so it was fresh in my mind. I was pretty sure I had that.
Use every piece of knowledge that you have, Terry. All right. Nobody's going to say otherwise by any means. All right. So let's start in Cleveland. And again, as we reference everything from the line to the total, everything at Odd Shopper, all the work is done for you. So you don't have to worry about searching around at any of the books specifically. You'll have the best odds, including different odds for each team in the same game. So this one is a pretty high total. It's one of the two that we have on the slate, hitting double digits, 10.5 in Cleveland, of course. And let's just start here kind of from the pitching element and, how you're approaching, especially where if you're looking at anybody here tonight, you're going to be paying down significantly.
Yeah, that was the Cleveland game you said?
Yes.
I was
Tampa and Cleveland.
I was grabbing our ownership update that dropped a couple minutes before we started. Wanted to be sure we were talking about some of the correct ownership projections as we're getting here. So I'm just clicking over to it now. We've got confirmed lineups in both of these spots, which is great. So we've got Tampa dropping an opener on us. It's Drew Rasmussen, who we talked about this on the morning show a little bit, and it's a concern, particularly in this spot, because Tampa essentially pioneered this idea of an opener. They do it very, very well, and they've got probably the most effective, dominant bullpen in the league this season. Best in the league by xFIP. They were, I believe, 6th or 7th best by strikeout rate when we looked it up. They were best in the league by walk rate. So they're just a very, very sharp bullpen. You're getting a kid like Rasmussen coming out there. He's got a 32.3% strikeout rate on the season. It's over 29 2/3. He's made one start. Most of it's coming in bullpen in relief work, but that's kind of the situation he's going to be in. They're not going to ask him to give you 4 innings here. He's going to pitch 1, maybe 2 innings off the top. So he can kind of really ramp up and focus on striking some of these hitters out. What I think that effectively does is takes the bats out of a lot of these these Guardians, Cleveland Indians becoming the Guardians. So taking the bats out of some of these Cleveland hitters' hands. So I really don't want to get to a Cleveland stack. I'm not going to be starting Rasmussen, even at 4K on DK. I think there's just enough of a question mark around. Like, he's not going to give us 4 innings, like I said. If he gives you 2 and change, there's a chance he could strike out enough hitters to make that a viable price. But it's just not that kind of a play. But I do think it limits the appeal of the Indians bats. And then on the other side, I want no part of rostering JC Mejia here. And I think you can throw Rays bats at him, although they are drawing a lot of ownership, particularly on the FanDuel slate. On DK, they're a little bit less owned.
Yeah, they're not to the point, right, where, and look, with 10 games, 20 teams, I don't know if 17, 18% ownership is much of a deterrent for you in the sense that you could still work and pretty much maneuver through that. But it is a big number. I mean, it's the second projected highest owned team that we have, to your point, Terry, and we definitely have them as the only on-site double-digit percentage for the top stack. So there's definitely a reward to it. But if you look at just where the field, they're a little overowned as far as what the value is. So I don't know if this is just, hey, we're starting here and there's clearly a lot of ability, with Tampa. But when you look at what we have in front of you, there may just be better value as far as working around ownership.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the conversation with some of these premium teams tonight. We're going to talk about a similar thing with the Reds, where they're just drawing so much ownership that it kind of makes sense to get away from them and just spread out to some of these other spots. On DK, I think you can probably get away with rostering and stringing together some of these hitters, although they've come up a little bit since this morning even. But I think if you're working with guys from the middle of the lineup, like Joey Wendell, Wander Franco, you could roster Mike Zunino on the DraftKings slate easily. He's only going to be at 6% ownership and change. He's not that expensive. Massive home run upside in that guy when he makes contact. Even Brett Phillips at the bottom of the lineup is interesting in a mid-range power and has speed kind of a frame. He's only at 202, 304, 339 on the season. Don't expect much, but as like a wraparound play with a little bit of speed for only 2,100 on either site and not that much ownership, he's kind of interesting. The problem is when you start getting into hitters like Brendan Lau up at the top, he's going to be 30% owned across sites. G-Man's going to be owned. Nelson's going to be owned. Austin Meadows is going to be owned. So the premium hitters, the guys that you really want to roster, the guys who are drawing the highest marks in my home run model, are all the guys who are tied up in the ownership. So if you can grab maybe one or two of those guys, offset it with some of the other guys that I mentioned from the back half of the lineup, that would be the approach. But it's just difficult because everybody who's rostering them is going to land on similar pitching combinations as well. So you just end up walking down the path with a lot of other people, and you're not getting to those unique wins where you're shooting to the top and other people aren't.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think just, moving on, we can pretty much wrap that from the standpoint of the bats and move to Cincinnati here, where, again, if you're looking to pay $7,500 for Luis Castillo, the payoff there may not be worth it simply because of where we have him projected, which is a decent across the board percentage as far as being in that top two. And there is some decent value there, but he is pretty high owned as well, at least for what he's getting. So I don't know if you want to look at Castillo. Let's start there. I know Woodford on the mound as well, but let's look at the pitching matchup first, if there's anything that jumps out in Cincinnati.
Yeah, if I'm going to a pitcher in this game, it's Luis Castillo. We talked about him a little bit in the morning show, and he's still a guy that I do think he's going to deliver a second half much more in line with who we thought Luis Castillo was coming into this season. We've seen signs of it already in some of his most recent starts. He's up to a 21.9% strikeout rate after struggling for a lot of the season. The whip is still really ugly at 141. But even with the struggles, he was only allowing a 4.7% barrel ball rate, only giving up a 5.9 degree average launch angle. So guys were still hitting the ball into the ground, hitting it on a line, not hitting a ton out of the park against him. The strikeout stuff, I expect will come back. He's inducing 12.6% swinging strikes. He was missing on the called strikes a lot, just wasn't around the plate as much. Walked too many hitters. He's up at the 10.1% walk rate. So just some uncharacteristic things that he was struggling with. I think the underlying signs do point to him having a return to form and continuing to be a good pitcher here. So I would roster him for 8,600 on the FanDuel slate in limited shares. He would be like my number 5, or I haven't counted him up, but he'd be 4 or 5 out of the list of pitchers we're going to talk about that have appeal. But at 8,600, I think there's enough of a difference in salary where he could give you some upside against this Cardinals lineup. They're a team that has a 20.4% strikeout rate. That's one of the problems running into this. But there are some premium hitters in that lineup with heavy strikeout rates. That average is bolstered by guys like Tommy Edman, who are at 12.8%. Nolan Arenado, obviously an extremely good hitter. He's at 13.3%. But Tyler O'Neill, 31%. Paul DeJong, 24.7%. Dylan Carlson up over 24%. There are targetable spots for strikeouts. At 7,500 and only 13% ownership on DK, I think he's really interesting. Castillo as an SP2. I think he's got to be on your list as an SP2 to play over there. So I would play in limited shares on FanDuel. It's easy enough to get up over his ownership there. And then I would consider him a lot on the DK slate.
Now, on the flip side, as far as the bats are concerned, we know that it's going to be, as far as the stack in comparison to a couple of other teams, a little cheaper across the board. But Cincinnati has a pretty decent chance, I would say top tier chance, right? As far as what we have third overall, although that can be a little misleading when you say a number like that on our top stacks tool, because you have pretty much 5 to 7 teams that are somewhat in that 8 to 5 range percentage of it, with Tampa being completely in its own planet. But Cincinnati is right there. It's just they're super high owned tonight. In fact, as we have them projected, the highest owned stack. Does that limit or maybe act as a pretty big deterrent for their value tonight for you?
It does. It really, really hampers the appeal. This is a lineup I've rostered all season. I really like getting to a lot of hitters in this lineup. It's a reasonably good version of their lineup. So I would be excited to roster them in this situation if it wasn't for nearly 25 to 30% ownership on all of the appealing hitters on FanDuel, similar marks up into the mid-20s on DK. It's just difficult to get to any of these guys in any kind of unique shape. And then their pricing is such that it probably is going to be pushing you toward you can roster them and get to some of the premium pitchers. So I think it's going to be another situation where not only are you rostering very popular hitters in the same combinations, but you're also going to be putting them together with very similar things as most of the field. So I expect these guys to be in a ton of duplicated lineups. Could they go off? Do they have a great chance of being the best team of the night? Absolutely. They're smashing my home run mark. I've got the 4 hitters from 2 through 5 are all well over 10 in my home run model. So there is appeal here for sure. It's just a matter of how are you getting away from the field if you do roster these guys. And some of the other like pay down stacks, if you wanted to go to high end pitching, the pay down stacks are super high owned also. So it just creates this situation where you're going to be hand in hand with way too much of the field. I'd rather get to some of these different spots, some of these low owned teams like the one I wrote about this afternoon in my tournament strategy article that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a minute. I love the spot for the Reds. I just can't get to them based on that ownership.
Is there anything real quick on outside? Because whenever we have a team like this that's lower cost on the slate and super high owned, is there any just punt / contrarian in a tournament to run with Woodford and run with St. Louis in the hopes that Cincinnati slows down and takes out close to 20% of the field?
I mean, I wouldn't do it I with a better pitcher. Yeah, I would maybe think, all right, there could be some upside here. Maybe he sneaks through with some strikeouts. Maybe he shuts this lineup down and you're taking out a decent amount of the field by doing it. It doesn't necessarily work as well that way, though, because you're still rostering that pitcher against a great offense with other really good pitchers on the board. So your opportunity cost becomes a major question there. I like to do that the other way around, rostering low-owned hitters against a pitcher that I think is maybe over-owned, where you can attack that and then say, all right, I'm taking out 20% of the field that's got that pitcher, and I'm doing it directly by rostering the bats that are going to go up against him. Like a pitcher could shut down a team, but still not have an overly viable DFS score too, which is the other part of that equation. So yeah, I like the idea, but I like to do it better with bats against the pitcher.
Well, it's a great point though, which is, you want to make sure you're getting points out of production, not just, if you think that Woodford's going to shut down Cincinnati, then that's probably better to just bet the Cardinals in that standpoint as opposed to roster them, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Go book that quality start and win bet for Woodford or something like that, or just the Cards on the runs and something. Yeah, it's
Cards plus 155, not a bad play by any means. If you think that could happen in Cincinnati, by all means. All right, let's move to Milwaukee here. And again, reminder, if you're just popping in, hit that like button. Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. That goes a mile for us. And you want to hit the notification bell so you're not thinking like, hey, all right, well, why am I late and just hearing this again? Marshall, I'm not sure exactly on the chat what question you would like answered, but if it's to do with I know there's a lot of early slate, like a lot of specific stuff he was asking about the early slate. So we're focusing tonight on the 10-game late slate. And now I feel like he's thinking I'm ignoring him. But by all means, we can get back to it and hit a couple of things that you have. See, best early game pitcher for the last 3 games, right? So that's what I was saying is we're trying to combine it more for what's happening later tonight. Anyway, we'll move on. We'll get back to you by all means, Marshall, on something a little bit more specific. I just didn't want people thinking we were ignoring what was happening earlier.
Yeah, the answer to that question, though, let's just hit it real quick because that slate is starting in a little bit. The pitching options are Drew Smyly, Vince Velasquez, Ryan Weathers, Braxton Garrett, John Lester, and Matt Harvey. The answer to that question is do not play. Just don't play that slate. It's a garbage slate. I mean, that's the kind of slate that would have the result that I was talking about before, though. 3 games, no good pitching whatsoever. That's about hitting. I would even, if you're playing on DK, start looking at some of the higher-end relievers maybe on that slate because all of those pitchers are just garbage or not going to give you enough depth. Like, I think Ryan Weathers is going to be a decent starter someday. He's probably only going to give you 3 innings today. Maybe that's enough. Maybe there's enough meat on the bone there. Vince Velasquez is probably your highest upside actual answer there in terms of the strikeouts, but I do not trust Vince Velasquez at all. And I do still respect that Braves lineup.
Don't do it, brother. I wouldn't let you trust Vince Velasquez.
Thank you. Yeah,
you're in this city watching this team. Look, I'll give Marshall 2 extra tidbits here as far as from the betting standpoint. If you'd like, just smash the Braves if you can get them, which you can. I know on Odd Shopper, plus money, plus 115. Smiley versus this team, especially with Velasquez, who will implode at one point. And if you can get that total, which you can at a pretty decent clip here, you can get under 5 in the first 5. I know, look, that seems like, come on, these guys are going to smash, but it's going to be one later to like mid-inning for Velasquez where he will implode. And then you have to deal with one of the worst bullpens in baseball. The Philadelphia Phillies are horrible from innings 7 through 9. So the under 5 at plus 125, I can see, in the Braves at plus 115. And you already got the insight you need from Terry. So there you have it, Marshall. All right. You got our attention and you got not 1, but 3 answers.
Covered it top to bottom. And for the person in chat who said I was disappointed because I had 100% Max Scherzer, you're both right and wrong. I guess I did have 100% Max Scherzer because I played 0 lineups. So he's in all of them. But there are none. I also played 0% Max Scherzer.
Let's look at Milwaukee. I love how, yes, take command of that and make sure that doesn't go unanswered by all means, because it'll come back up in like 20 minutes as well. Like, come on, Terry didn't see it. All right, let's move to Milwaukee. Now we're talking here. 2 big money pitchers, a lot of projections here for both as far as being in that top 2% for DraftKings. And really, the top 2 guys we have both double the next the 3, 4, 5, basically everybody else below them. So let's look at this. I don't know if it, again, goes in the face of what we were talking about earlier, the point you made, which is trying to spend a little bit more for bats. So I imagine that the obvious question of you rostering both pitchers tonight as far as 1, 2 is probably not likely, but that doesn't mean it's excluding one of the 2 from your lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can figure out a good way to do it where you're not only just walking into all that public ownership on the cheapest stacks when people are stacking both these pitchers, I actually don't really mind that, even though you're taking probably a little bit of the win equity away from your team. I think these guys are just in a class of their own in terms of this slate, in terms of the strikeout game that they each could have. We could see both of these guys rack up 8 to 10 strikeouts each, pitch a clean game each over 7, 8 innings. This is going to be, most likely, going to be a very good pitchers duel. It should be a fun game to watch from that perspective if you're into pitching, which I really think is an interesting way to watch the game. They're owned at appropriate levels on both sites. I don't think there's any problem with rostering them around the field. If you wanted to exceed the field, I don't think it's totally crazy. Just these guys are that good. You're talking about Carlos Rodon, 36.6% strikeout rate over 96 2/3 and 16 starts. Burns answers that with 16 starts of his own, 96 innings, 37.2% strikeout rate. They both have a .90 whip. Rodon has a 2.91 xFIP. Burns answers with a 2.07. Burns is walking a few fewer hitters. They both induce over 15% swinging strikes. They're just excellent. Burns throws a few more called strikes. He's at the 34.4% CSW, where Rodon's at a 30.8 because Rodon works out of the zone a little bit more. They're both excellent in terms of the contact metrics. Burns is a little bit better because he limits hard contact a lot more. He's at a 28.4% hard hit rate, where Rodon comes in at a 38.1, which is up there, but Rodon throws the ball a little harder. He also has a 5.7% barrel ball rate compared to a 3.3 for Burns. All of these marks are above average and excellent. We're quibbling if we're deciding between the 2. I also think there's more strikeout upside on the board for Rodon. So to me, it's a slight edge to Rodon based on the strikeout upside that I think is in that Brewers lineup. But I love the spot for both pitchers. I will have a lot of both pitchers.
So do we bypass the stacks here and just start talking about matchups and maybe 1 or 2 guys on either team that are worth the cost? Because I just don't know if it's worth it to push either one of these stacks who are both projected pretty low, of course, as expected tonight with just such a heavy pitching matchup.
Yeah, it's a spot where if you're trying to think contrarian, right? You spot, all right, it's some decent lineup, especially the White Sox are a good lineup. They're a team that people like to get to. You spot, hey, everybody on the team is under 1% ownership on both sites. Wow, that's got to be appealing from a contrarian perspective. There are good contrarian spots and there are bad contrarian spots. To me, this is a bad contrarian spot. You're attacking one of the guys who's been pitching the best in baseball, all of the entire league. You're on both sides of this game. You're walking into that kind of a buzzsaw here. So for me, it's just not the spot. I would have no problems, honestly, just taking both of these offenses out of your crunch entirely and just not worrying about them. This game's all about the pitching.
Love it. All right. So not even worth trying to force in an individual bat there. And look, again, it's all about spending your money, right? Wisely.
Yeah, exactly.
Here.
You want to spend your money the right ways. These teams are priced down. I mean, and like if I wanted to grab a one-off, it would most likely be out of the White Sox lineup because I expect to have more Rodon, and I think they're the better lineup. But Burns does such a good job suppressing power, suppressing extra base hits with that limited hard hit rate, the limited barrel rate, that I don't really want any of these hitters. Jose Abreu typically gets a very good home run mark in my model. He's got a 223 ISO and 18 home runs and 389 plate appearances. He's at a 2.32 in my home run model. If you know how the home run model works, 10 is where you get to an above average chance. So that's way, way lower than we normally see a guy like Jose Abreu. He's the top guy on the White Sox today. So, I mean, it's just not a good spot.
So there's a question that I know people, especially as the NBA is over and people are already part of the channel, fueling, their interests and desires to continue to play DFS or popping in here on the MLB channel. So there's a question from Alex that I wanted just to throw at you for more of the broader content that we talk about here, and especially for specifics of people hearing stacks that may not know the depths of it. But again, two quick reminders. One, the Top Pitchers tool is free for you. You should be using it. We're always using these tools, the Top Stacks tool as well, but alongside what we're doing tonight as the best way to kind of accompany the show. And also, in case you haven't been told, which I'm sure you have, I know you have, we have not one but two brand new YouTube channels to subscribe to. So everything across the board for DFS with season-long fantasy football, sports betting, both two separate ones, Awesemo Odds, Awesemo Fantasy Football, everything that you can do from both betting to fantasy football content across the board. So make sure you stay up to date with videos from your favorite hosts here on Awesemo, from fantasy football again to sports betting. You can check out the Awesemo Odds tab for access to Odd Shopper and our MLB betting tools, which also have our sports betting models and player prop. It's everything. Player props, betting models. We expand that from the odds standpoint and just give you as much in-depth content from a fantasy football standpoint. And then, of course, we're still here doing everything from the MLB Deeper Dive to Live Before Lock. I know this question pops up every now and again. And again, just where we are right now with people kind of jumping in, if you will, from other sports, especially with the NBA done, or just getting ready ahead of the NFL season. The question is simple, which is usually, Terry, how deep on a lineup do you go when you're stacking, and how much do you apply maybe the mini stack on a slate?
Sure. So for me, typically what I'm chasing is that full correlation. I'm chasing those full stacks. You're talking about an event-based sport, which is why we want to chase the stacks, because if you think it through, let's say, look, I just have the White Sox lineup, so we'll use it even though we're not playing them today, right? Tim Anderson's leading off. Tim Anderson singles, maybe he steals a base. He's scoring individual points. Gavin Sheets gets on, he gets walked, and then Jose Abreu hits a 3-run home run. All of those guys score on that 3-run home run because they're scoring runs, so they get additional points. So that rising tide lifts all boats, to use an old clunky saying. And that's what we're chasing here. We want those events because there's so few events where there's actual scoring going on in these games. You have to capture all of the scoring that's associated with them. The best way to do that is by stacking lineups rather than trying to throw individual darts of, I think these 9 separate guys are going to all hit 2-run home runs tonight. That's a very difficult trick to pull in roster construction. So you want to be finding those guys who are getting on base a couple of times, scoring a few runs when the power hitters are hitting their home runs. Also, that they have upside of their own individually, like a guy like Timmy Anderson, who has home run upside, stolen base upside of his own. So you want to be looking toward the hitters toward the top of the lineup, of course. But then for ownership, salary, and various reasons, you can always dip down to the 7, 8, 9 hitters. I like wrapping stacks around a little bit more than most people do because I like getting a little bit different with my construction than getting away from the field. It's arguable one way or the other, but you're going for full stacks. So FanDuel, you're looking at 4-4s, maybe some 4-3-1s where you're rostering 1-1 off. Same story on DK where you're getting 5-3s, 5-2-1s. If you want to start looking at like 3-3-2s and things like that, it's creeping in around the edges with some of the pros out there, and we're seeing more results that are hitting that way, particularly this year with all the wackiness that's going on with pitching and everything. So it's not totally off the board or totally unviable, but my strong preference is still to go for the correlation involved with full stacks.
All right. Now, on that note, continuing to talk, and you'll hear Alex and others, Terry mentioned stacks. Again, our Top Stacks tool is something that you should be using throughout the shows. The Top Pitchers tool is free. So let's go to New York here. And we've got two guys who are kind of smack in the middle as far as our projections are concerned, Ryu and Walker, but the price, I don't know. I mean, they're kind of in this weird zone, right, on DK, 8,200, 8,400, Walker, Ryu, respectively, where it's like, all right, I could either pay down for somebody, as we talked about, like Castillo, a couple of other guys that we will talk about, or maybe just pay up another grand for a Bassett. Again, some other people we will talk. So I don't know if the pricing in this case is just maybe not enough of a break to go with. How are you approaching these two guys?
I'm probably going to be taking mostly a hands-off approach. Maybe it's just because I've gotten burnt on Taijuan Walker a couple times. I think that he's been having what we've been referring to as a very good year. It's largely a very good year for him. Like he's a guy that nobody really expected much from, who has made himself into like a league average pitcher. And now he's maybe on the decline. So I don't know that that's the spot where I want to get jumping on him after he's already burnt me a couple times this year. So for me, bit of a stay away with Taijuan. It looks like the field's kind of lining up that way as well, not getting much ownership on either side. If you want to make an argument for the fact that he's low owned and has put up some good games this season, that's fine. I don't disagree with that, but I would counter with the fact that he's going up against a very good Blue Jays lineup. And that's the side of this game that I think I want to be on, is the Blue Jays bats. Ryu projects out well in my model, but I'm not really trusting it yet. I wanted to get a better chance to look into it and see what it was getting for his innings projection, which I think was over 6, which I think is a flaw in how my model put his innings together today. Looking through some of his innings in recent starts, I mean, he's getting 6 innings relatively reliably, pitched 7 innings in a couple recent starts. So maybe it is accurate, in which case it is creating a nice little projection around him. The Mets, 24.4% strikeout rate for the confirmed lineup. There are some holes toward the back end of the lineup. McCann, VR, Pilar, and Guillaume, not necessarily a murderer's row final 4 in that lineup. Nimmo, Alonso, Smith, and J.D. Davis up top. I do like the quality there. I'd be concerned about Ryu, but I'm maybe coming around to rostering a few shares of them just based on the trust my model idea. I don't love it, though. I do like the other pitchers that we've talked about and the ones that you mentioned in the windup to that question better in this spot than I like Ryu. But maybe if a few shares creep in, I'd be fine. But still, my favorite spot in this game is the Blue Jays bats.
Yeah, and just looking at the bats, I mean, they're one of, if not the, well, not overall but they're one of the top cost stacks on the board, but they're not owned at all. So if it's worth it, and this goes back to your, see, now I start to see it coming together, where you say in the beginning of the program, look, I'm going to be saving money when it comes to the pitching to make sure that I can spend up for some bats. Specifically now looking at this, there is a ton of leverage with where we have Toronto as far as a top stack percentage with only 4 teams in front of them. The fact that, yes, you're going to pay up, but if you're budgeting your money like Terry is telling you to, then you've got plenty of money to spend, and you're going to be in the 1 to 1.5 percentile of ownership, which should crush tonight.
Yeah, exactly. If this stack connects and you're on it to any significant degrees, you're going to have a good night. I mean, these guys are so low owned. There's so much quality in this lineup. It's a go-to game for a lot of people through the season. I don't really know why, particularly if Taijuan's not getting ownership, why people aren't going to this outside of, they're expensive and people want to pay up to get to all the expensive starting pitching on this slate. But I think there are definitely ways that you can stitch it together on both sites where you're getting 2 reasonably talented pitchers and you're rostering a full Blue Jays stack and then getting quality in the other stack without too much effort. I put together just my placeholder that's in there right now on FanDuel lineup that I actually really like. I hope that everybody is ending up in the starting lineup that I put in, and I haven't checked back yet. But I want to thread a lot of these guys together, and I really like the construction of the lineup today, too. They moved George Springer up to the leadoff spot. They've got Semien hitting 3rd in this lineup today, Bo Bichette cleaning up, Teoscar 5th, Lourdes Gurriel in the lineup 6th, and Kevin Biggio 7. They dropped the DH. I don't particularly care. I'm not that worried about it. I really like the spot for the low-owned Blue Jays here. It's just a matter of how many different configurations you can put together with these extremely expensive bats on the DraftKings slate. Vladdy's coming in more expensive than a solid handful of the GK pitchers. So he's really difficult to roster. But anytime Vlad Guerrero is going to be under 1% owned, you're talking about one of the best hitters in the league at this point. 325, 426, 669 slugging percentage, 32 home runs, 343 ISO, creating runs 91% better than average. He's almost a whole other player. They almost do have a DH because he creates runs so well. So, love this spot. Love this lineup.
All right, we'll move on to Houston and hit the halfway point. No House Advantage, again, our sponsor tonight. So you can take advantage at NHA of over 500 player props, including, yes, especially Major League Baseball. Football is right around the corner. Golf is going on, day 3 of the 3M happening. So everything for cash prizes, and it's all peer-to-peer. Everything locks in. You don't have to worry like books as far as bets and things pushing it up and down. You don't have to worry about any type of line moving due to injury or concern. It's locked in the morning, and you can take advantage whenever you see it pop up in NHA. And if you're in PA, Arkansas, Massachusetts, PA like myself, especially here because NHA is now available to play. So if you've been in Pennsylvania like me, just salivating at the opportunity, just begging NHA's Terry knows have been like, I can't wait. Now I can full on take advantage. And you know what? I'm going to use the promo code Awesemo, and I'm going to get a $20 instant match deposit. How about that?
There you go. That's some thinking. Using your head over there in Pensy.
Trying, right? Not all the time. Don't look. I don't want Philadelphia to get some sort of mislabel about us using our heads. It's just every now and again. All right.
I certainly don't think we're going to have that problem.
Fair enough. Yes. I don't think anybody's going to buy into that just one time. Absolutely. All right. Let's hit Houston here. And again, we kind of get into this range of pitchers. If it's Gibson, 8,100 on DK. Valdez, you're going to spend a little bit higher here. So let's look at this not only from a P1 or really P2 standpoint, if we're moving away from the two guys that you mentioned earlier in that great matchup in Milwaukee. Also, if there's any pivot with either one of these guys in a tournament for FanDuel.
Yeah, to me, I think Framber's an interesting pivot. I think you get a nice little savings in his cost. He's only 8,200 on the FanDuel slate, so that's a decent drop down from your Carlos Rodon, Kevin Gausman, and Corbin Burns. It's even a significant step down from Chris Bassett, who I think is, he's around the same level of talent. And what I really like about Framber is he's another guy that just totally limits the upside of the opposing offense. He's got a 70+% ground ball rate on the season. He generates an average launch angle of negative 6.5 degrees. Guys just hit the ball directly into the ground. So I honestly don't care that they hit him with a 42.4% hard hit rate because he's just super difficult to elevate the ball against. He's got a 21.4% strikeout rate. It's climbing a little bit. We've seen him better than that strikeout rate in the past. His 11.2% induced swinging strikes, a 3.54 xFIP. There's plenty to like here, and I think there are bonus strikeouts available in this Rangers lineup. Confirmed lineup has an average strikeout rate of 25.9%. That does get inflated by the fact that Curtis Terry, whoever the hell he is in the middle of this lineup hitting 5th. He's only had 4 plate appearances, struck out in half of them. So there's a 50%er in there that's pushing that up. But starting from Adolis Garcia, I've still got, I had to change Vladdy Guerrero's name. So yeah, we get Eli White. So that's a 26.3% average. I had a couple of the Blue Jays stuck in there by accident. So you get Eli White at 30% hitting second, Adolis Garcia 30% hitting third, Nate Lowe in this lineup. You don't have Joey Gallo in the lineup today. Nate Lowe, 26.3% strikeout rate. The back end of the lineup with David Dahl, Charlie Culberson, well over 20%. They're just targetable spots. And without their best hitter, their best power hitter in this lineup, it's a great spot to attack with Framber Valdez here. So I actually, now that I'm seeing that Joey's not in there, I'm going to even give Framber another little push. And I think it's going to pick him up a lot. So I'm going to look to exceed the 14% ownership on the FanDuel slate. I think it makes a ton of sense as a DK option as well. It might not work as an SP2, but if you wanted to go cheap SP1 and expensive SP2 with a guy like him, and then maybe you're grabbing like Bassett or even honestly, Framber and Luis Castillo helped you pay for the Blue Jays on the DK slate, and I do not hate that combination of pitchers.
I like that a lot. FanDuel, you mentioned Valdez. Now I just want to make sure that I'm updated here because you said just 14%, right? So that's probably he's up to now 19%. No, that's DraftKings, pardon me. So he's the third owned. I know that. Just over 14%. You're accurate. Yeah, he was. And that's clearly going to creep up, especially without Votto, right?
Yeah, I think that's gonna climb based on, he's gonna be talked about around the industry as we get into lock. I'm sure he's been talked about through the day. I know we hit on him on the morning show. Both Greg and I liked him a lot. So it's a popular spot. He's probably mispriced on the FanDuel slate, honestly, at 8,200. So it makes sense that he's drawing that. But I think you squeeze enough value and enough upside out of that spot that I think it's worth getting to Like if he goes off around 20%, maybe I won't be over the field, but I'll at least be around the field on him. And I think it's a safe enough option to be around the field with, where I don't really care that we're not getting way out ahead, because we are getting that savings there and we are getting to some differentiated bats. So I do like that spot.
All right. Now on the flip side here, just to look at the stack in comparison, is there, I don't know if there's maneuverability now to work with Houston, since if you like the matchup from a Valdez, that doesn't always translate though. So Houston kind of sitting on that bottom of the top tier for where we have projected. Now, Texas is going to be at the bottom, of course, going up against Valdez, but I don't know if the Houston bats jump out, or maybe even a one-off with Texas.
Yeah, I tell you what, if I can figure out a good way to put these Houston bats together with these Blue Jays bats together and not have you pitching in that lineup, I'm going to try and do it as much as possible, because I like this spot. They're going up against Kyle Gibson. I know Kyle Gibson made the All-Star team this year, but he's kind of gone bust. Like it was all freight train of hype to the All-Star game, and then he's kind of fallen apart. So he's turning back into a pumpkin. 20.8% strikeout rate, even through the good part of the season. 11.2% induced swinging strikes is good, but only resulting in 20.8% strikeout rate. That's nothing special. 7.6% walks is inflated. 1.13 whip is okay, but it's not special. It's not somebody who you need to avoid by any means. And we're talking about one of the best hitting lineups in all of baseball. The team that is best at limiting strikeouts against both hands. And they're underpriced. Like Yuli Gurriel in the middle of this lineup is 2,700. That's bananas. Jordan Alvarez is 3,400 on FanDuel. He's 5,400 on DK, which makes sense. That's a good price for this kid. It just, they're underpriced for who they are, and they're honestly underowned. So I really like that spot. I like the idea of combining with Blue Jays where I can, and I have no problem attacking Kyle Gibson. He wasn't somebody I believed in while he was pitching well, and I think the metrics bear it out that like he wasn't even really all that great all along.
All right, so we'll move on to Kansas City and look at this with two pitchers who you're not going to be paying much for, and the trade-off is good because neither one are really projected to do much. I know normally we're throwing stuff in, we're derailed, we're going all over the place. We have so much now on these strategy shows to get in, so I won't get into the deeper one that I had that I know would bring up more conversation, but I did put this out on Twitter earlier because it was a sports-less day in Philadelphia, if you will. I wasn't going to sit there and watch my bet burst for the Phillies. So I was leading up to that, and I caught Usual Suspects, which is, again, an all-timer classic and all. And just so you know, those aren't CDs or cassette tapes or anything behind Terry. Those are legit movies. So he's the guy to go to in this. And I put this simple tweet out. So I want you to think about it. I took the obvious one out. The biggest lie ever told in a movie. Because The Usual Suspects is the lie, right? Kevin Spacey, right. And then, he drops the mug at the end. Chaz, big Yankees honk, Chaz Palminteri drops the mug, and it's like, oh, man, he walks out. So is there a bigger one person lie out there told? Sorry?
There's one person out there you just spoiled that whole movie for.
Right, I apologize.
Who's going to be mad
I'm
at you?
sorry.
Like, I was going to watch that this weekend.
Look, I'll take the hit on that if I'm spoiling it for you now. Is there a bigger lie told on film in a movie?
No. That's a really good one. I mean, that's if we're talking about like a character spinning a web, spinning a story, that's got to be the top answer. The entire story is fabricated. He makes that all up from whole cloth. If you want to talk about like the movie throwing you a curveball and the plot, all of that giving you a major misdirection, I think The Sixth Sense has to be in the all-time twist ending conversations at least. I know M. Night Shyamalan gets a lot of flack for being kind of a hack, and I think it's justifiable, but that remains a terrific movie, and just the moment at the end of that movie is like, wow. So, I mean, if we're talking about like twists and stuff like that, then I would put that in the conversation.
Okay.
But yeah, just character lies, that's got to be the all-timer.
Like a movie just lying to you, and then all of a sudden at the end of being like, ha ha. Yeah, that's right. M. Night. That's why he pisses everybody off. All right. Exactly. And I've ruined, by the way, it wasn't one person. I think there are about 5 people so far on the chat who I've ruined The Usual Suspects for. If we need more likes. It's getting to the point where we may have more people that have been ruined as opposed to liking the show. So I apologize ahead of time. And like I said,
if we don't get to 100 likes, Eytan's going to spoil the Star Wars trilogy next.
I'm going to spoil. Yes. What else can we do? The Wire? Like, is there shows, Sopranos? Like, I'll spoil it. Game of Thrones, whatever you want spoiled here, by all means.
Spoilers the last 10 minutes to put out 100 likes.
Exactly. If we don't hit 100 likes, I'm going to spoil M. Night Shyamalan's The Village for the entire channel and piss everybody off.
That one I saw coming in a cab down Broadway. That one was kind of, if you didn't have that one by like midway through that movie, I would be
something
surprised.
was up. All right.
So all of that is to say we don't need to roster either pitcher in this game.
Thank you. I love that. And you read my mind because we're not going to waste time or waste the chat's time, mind you. But on the flip side, we've got two stacks that are pretty super high projected, a little different when you look at maybe cost, right, between Detroit and Kansas City. Detroit's going to be super low as far as money is concerned versus the Royals, which are going to pay up. So where do we go with the stacks, knowing that both can provide value?
Yeah, there's value on the board there. But for me, we talked about it on the morning show. We talked about it yesterday when the Tigers were getting all this attention. For me, they're just too owned. Even against a bad pitcher, I just don't like getting to teams that I think are bad. I don't think it makes that much sense to stack these Tigers, even though they do help you pay for some of those pitchers. And some of the guys, honestly, on FanDuel aren't even that cheap. Like some of these guys fall into territory that's around the prices that I was naming for the Astros. Jonathan Scope is $3,500. What did I say Jordan Alvarez was? 34? I would much rather have Jordan Alvarez in the Astros lineup, in my lineup. So I don't really need to get to too many Tigers. I think they're over-owned here. The slate can have them. If the Tigers beat me today, that's fine. I am okay with that, despite the fact that Carlos Hernandez is probably a very targetable pitcher. He's 25 and 2/3 innings. He's got a 30.5% strikeout rate, most of it out of the pen. I expect that'll come down. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Tigers hang 6 runs on them. But if they're going to give us that major DFS upside, I will sacrifice the win to the slate on this one. I think the Royals are very interesting in terms of their upside going up against Casey Mize here. But they're getting a similar story in terms of the ownership on FanDuel. I think they're a much better lineup, much more talented team. They string together just more quality in terms of being able to fill a DFS box score. But they're difficult to own on the FanDuel slate because everybody is drawing close to 20% ownership in the top 4. If you get to Jorge Soler, I would maybe roster Jorge Soler as a one-off. I just love his power. I can't quit his power. He had 48 home runs 2 years ago. He's struggling this year, 185, 282, 331 with a 146 ISO and only 9 home runs. But it's there. I know the power's in that bat. So maybe I want off Jorge Soler there. On DK, I think you can stack the Royals if you can figure out a good way to pay for it. They're very expensive. So you're probably making the decision between, all right, am I going to Royals against a bad pitcher? Or am I going to Blue Jays against what's maybe a more talented pitcher? But I think there's more probably upside in general in the Blue Jays. They're a better team.
All right, to Minnesota, and watching that comeback victory last night just because I had a nice little parlay, and all I needed was Minnesota to win that. So I don't know if I can count on that yet again, but the matchup is interesting, at least from the pitching standpoint, because we have in Berrios a guy at 8,800 who is projected pretty high on DK for our our top pitchers tool, which is free. Reminder, free for you tonight. So use it across the board as we're talking. Berrios at 8,800 is the 4th highest projected pitcher to hit in that top 2 stack. So if we're paying up for one of the guys in the White Sox Brewers game, I imagine now that this becomes a really good option as a P2.
Yeah, absolutely. 8,800 is probably too cheap for Berrios here in this spot. 8,400 on the FanDuel slate. I think he's even got some appeal over there. I don't know how much I'll end up with him just based on only getting one pitcher and wanting to get to more of those other guys. But I think it's an appealing spot. The Angels do get Ohtani and Jared Walsh back in the lineup, but it's still overall a diminished lineup with a ton of strikeouts in it. So I don't mind attacking these guys. Even a hitter as good as Ohtani, he's still at a 30% strikeout rate. So when he's not hitting home runs, he's probably striking out. So I think he's exploitable there in terms of the potential for Jose Berrios to maybe be a little bit sneaky. And then you get guys like Justin Upton approaching 30%, Jared Walsh approaching 30%. Back end of the lineup doesn't do any help with Max Stassi, Adam Eaton, Jack Mayfield back there. Really, you get David Fletcher up top is very good with the hit tool and getting on base and helping create runs and only strikes out 10.3% of the time. Everybody else in this lineup is pretty targetable. He will have to dance around the obvious power upside of Shohei Ohtani, Justin Upton, and Jared Walsh to a little bit less of a degree. But I don't love the talent in the back end of this lineup. I do think Brandon Marsh will eventually be a good player, but he just got called up. There's nothing to really worry about there. So after the 4 spot, there's not that much to really sweat here. I think Berrios has a really good opportunity to give us, at worst, a clean start and potentially a strikeout upside start.
Is there any maneuverability with Minnesota as a stack? I know we have the Angels projected just a little bit higher, but it's not like Minnesota is projected to be flat and dead tonight.
Yeah, I think they're at least a little interesting and frisky. They do have significant power. They have a reputation for getting to left-handed pitching over time. when you're talking about hitters like Josh Donaldson and Miguel Sano in particular. Ryan Jeffers has a lot of power in that lineup as well, even though it hasn't been completely demonstrated this year. Losing Nelson Cruz takes a ton away from this lineup. We can't beat around that. They're getting a little bit more left-handed as well. Trevor Larnach in there, Max Kepler in a prime spot in the 3 spot. So going up against a lefty, it's not the greatest lefty in the world, but Sandoval has been decent in terms of limiting the launch angle, only at 4 degrees, limiting the hard hit, only 34.5%. So I think he takes enough away from the power of this team, which is really what we're chasing when we roster Twins, is getting a few guys on base and then chasing those home runs. I don't love it. I think I'll be there because they're not going to be that owned and they're fairly priced. Getting Brent Rooker in the 2 spot at the dead minimum on FanDuel is pretty interesting when he's under 10% owned. So there are appealing DFS points. I think it's a better DFS spot maybe than it is an overall baseball spot. But I will get there a little bit, and it'll be with that top, the 1 through 5 in that lineup, most likely. Jorge Polanco, Brent Rooker, Max Kepler, Josh Donaldson, and Miguel Sano. If you're getting to one-offs, I don't mind some Josh Donaldson one-off. I don't mind some Miguel Sano one-off just for the home run upside against the lefty.
All right, we'll move to San Fran. Pittsburgh is the biggest dog, and it's not really close tonight. Over 200 on Odd Chopper, plus 225, where you can find that great value. As always, in San Fran, not going to be too high, projected of a total at 8. We have one guy here, right, who might be the best, at least from a DraftKings standpoint, Terry. I'll let you explain. It might be the best pivot across the board as a P1 when we finally kind of hit that conversation for DraftKings, because so much has been about working in a P2.
Yeah, I think so. Gausman projects very, very well for me, a little bit better than the site has him. He's super expensive on the FanDuel slate at $11,000, and he has been kind of maybe a victim of that sticky stuff spin rate conversation. If you look at his spin rate chart over game by game over his last handful of games since the middle of June, he dips and dives and then spikes back up. He's had a couple starts where he's not throwing his slider, not throwing his changeup. The saving grace is his 4-seam fastball has been almost a dead straight line, and he needs that pitch to have heavy spin on it because of the effect that it has playing off of his split finger. Those are his 2 primary offerings. He throws those over 50% of the time combined between the 2 pitches. So as long as those 2 are working, I think he's at least safe, and I think there is still that upside. The one thing the Pirates always do well with this lineup is limit strikeouts anyway. You're taking Gausman and his 30.5% strikeout rate and walking him into a team that the confirmed lineup, 19.8% strikeout rate overall. They're in the low 20s against right-handed pitching, one of the better, I think second best in baseball. But I don't fear this lineup. And I think there's a pitcher as talented as Gausman. I think we'll be getting the ball hit on the ground a decent amount. I think we'll be getting the ball not hit over the wall. I think he's safe, and he has some sneaky upside. So for 9,700, I think he's an interesting pivot on DK. And then you're getting, at least the ownership gets pushed off of him for 11,000 on the FanDuel slate. And I do think there's upside there. There's a little bit of danger if there is more to that spin narrative in him. There is less effectiveness in his pitchers. If the slider's completely gone away, that's going to hurt him a little bit. The same thing with the changeup, because those are the pitches that he keeps hitters off balance with. If they only are looking for the fastball splitter combination, they'll catch up to that quick enough. So it's an interesting spot for him. It's a concerning spot. I expect I'll be well over the field on him. I'm very curious to see how it works out.
Before we move to LA, I'm just curious about San Fran, their bats. Clearly, they're going to be on the cheaper side, but I just, for where they're projected, which is kind of in the bottom of the middle tier to be the top stack, and how they're owned, projected to be the 4th owned stack, I don't even know if it's worth it, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a really targetable spot, and they're somewhat affordable, but it's another situation where we're getting some heavy ownership. The DK ownership is a little bit worse than the FanDuel ownership. I think I can get to them on the FanDuel slate if I'm getting different enough with pitcher, getting different enough with the primary stack. They're in an excellent run creation spot. I've been using a metric that's barrel ball rate plus walk rate minus strikeout rate, and then you multiply by -1 to offset it and get it into sensible numbers. Wilcrow, one of the most targetable spots on the board with a -1.7 in that metric. And what that's doing is it's kind of just reducing it to an opportunity idea for run creation, right? If you're putting too many guys on base via walks and you're allowing too many barrels and not striking a lot of guys out to limit the sequential hitting and limit the ability for teams to string runs together, that's where that number is going to come from. So there's a big indicator for that on Wilcrow. The Giants have been excellent on offense all year long, so I think it's justifiable to get there. It's just another spot that's going to be walking into a lot of public ownership, but I do like them tonight.
All right, to LA, two left. And by the way, I got one on Twitter earlier that I'm going to throw at you before we leave, because it's a classic movie and it's a classic lie that would completely gut how Karate Kid ends. All right. So just trust me. I'll answer that tease before we get out of here. We've got Gonsolin and Freeland. Again, Gonsolin, we've had this before on the slate where one guy a little bit higher cost. I don't really know if it's worth it as far as the maneuverability now, especially on FanDuel. For either one of these guys, you're going to get Gonsolin much cheaper than you are on DK. So really for Gonsolin, are you do anticipate much exposure to him as a P2?
I don't think so, because I think he's a little too high priced based on the innings, the potential that he's only going to give us like 4 innings here. He's a guy who's pitched mostly out of that hybrid role in his career where he's bouncing between some starts and some bullpen relief. The innings are a major question mark for 8,000. If he was the FanDuel price on the DK slate, I would think it's a really appealing SP2 spot. I do like the 26.8% strikeout rate. I do like the fact that he's going up against what is a really miserable Rockies lineup overall. So there's upside there. I just don't know how much we're going to see him. And with so many other pitchers on the slate, you're not getting enough savings from some of the more viable guys in that 8,000 range, where I'd just rather pay 8,600 for, excuse me, that's the FanDuel price. I'd rather pay 7,500 for Luis Castillo in that spot than 8,000 for Tony Gonsolin in this spot with an innings question mark.
Dodgers stack. I mean, they're not really high owned. I know you're going to pay a little bit more. It's not like they're the most expensive stack, but before we hit Seattle, any interest in those bats, at least from a one-off or two?
Yeah, a little bit. They're somewhat cheap on the back end of this lineup on the FanDuel slate. You've got a few guys, 2,300, 2,200s, a couple min-price guys there. So they can help you make things work if you're slapping some of those guys together and then putting them together with the hitters in the middle of the lineup. It's a diminished version of this Dodgers lineup, though. No Mookie Betts, no Cody Bellinger in this lineup. So you got Chris Taylor and AJ Pollock up top, Justin Turner, Will Smith, Albert Pujols. There's some power production, but overall they're definitely diminished here. I would get to them to help me get to other teams. It wouldn't be my prime target, but if they help me roster Blue Jays, if they help me roster some of the other prime spots or some of the prime pitching, I'm happy to get to some of the Dodgers here. I do like the spot against Freeland here. Another guy that trends into the negative territory in that BBB minus K spot. So I expect that the Dodgers are competent enough they can string together some runs here.
All right. How about this before we end on Oakland and Seattle? And again, make sure you hit us with a like on your way out. I know we wanted 100 before I started ruining holidays. That might happen in the final 60 to 90 seconds here. But remember, I'll take you back real quick to the All Valley Karate Championship, where the rules were clearly stated: contact to the face is illegal. And how did this movie end? The crane kick. Come on.
Kick to the face.
That's a lie and a half right there.
Giant flaw in that movie. Supports the narrative that Daniel was the bad guy all along, which they play into in Cobra Kai. If anybody out there is a big Karate Kid fan and has not watched Cobra Kai, that is a fun series. It's great. It's pulpy. It's just silly, and it's just a lot of fun. They play into that angle really well.
I know what. Next time we work together, I will be sure that I have at least one season under my belt. Chris Bassett has been a popular name on the chat. You've mentioned him a couple of times. We wind down with our final game here. I don't know how much you're getting to Logan Gilbert, if at all, but Chris Bassett has definitely popped up. How much exposure do you get from him before we close on the bats?
Yeah, so Gilbert, I think, is an interesting pitcher, but this isn't the spot for him, so I'm not going to be getting to him. I will be getting to some Chris Bassett. I think he's under-owned on the FanDuel slate. 9,700, he's priced up, but I really like the spot going up against these Mariners. 26.5% strikeout rate average for this team in the projected lineup. I haven't had a chance to drop the confirm, but I think it's basically the same lineup. Just a targetable team. They don't create runs well. They don't hit for power well. Bassett's been doing everything right this season. He gives you a ton of depth. He was one of the most innings pitched. Tied for basically third with a bunch of people in the league in quality starts. Gives you a great shot at both a win and a quality start in this spot. I think he's under-owned at under 5% ownership on FanDuel. Arguably under-owned on the DK slate, well under 10% over there. You're paying 9,900 for him. Puts him into that SP1 range where if you're not rostering Burns or Rodon or arguably Kevin Gausman, I think this would be my go-to there. So if you want to save some money, that's a good SP1 spot that's not getting enough attention. I really like Chris Bassett here.
Bats with Oakland as we wind down here. I imagine Seattle's pretty much out of the picture, especially for the cost and the return that you're going to get.
Yeah, not much appeal for attacking Chris Bassett. He does too much well. Limits hard hit, 32.5% hard hit rate. So yeah, on the A's side of things, I think there are worse playable one-offs here. If you want to grab one-offs of Matt Olson all day long at under 5% ownership on both sites, fire away. Absolutely there. Stacking them, I'd be maybe a little bit less inclined. Just the lineup in general hasn't performed up to par, although they do have Ramon Laureano back. Matt Chapman could turn it around any day. Mitch Moreland with his lefty power against a righty. I don't mind it. And Logan Gilbert does give up 43.2% hard contact, 18.9 degree average launch angle, and a 7.9% barrel ball rate. That's a home run trajectory, home run profile. So yeah, some A stacks could be a little bit sneaky. I think I prefer them for one-offs.
Awesome stuff. We jammed it all in. We appreciate you hanging with us again for Terry, Tyler producing the show, No House Advantage sponsoring the show. Don't go anywhere because right here you've got Greg and Gundacker coming up with a live before lock. So they'll continue to get you ready for the big slate tonight, the 10-game slate. Continue to use our free tools, the MLB Top Tool, the MMA Fighter Rankings, but really you should be subscribed here, $29.95 a week, Awesemo Plus. It's always a pleasure, my brother. Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, this is a blast, man. It had been too long.
Awesome. All right. Have a great night, everybody. Don't go anywhere. Live before lock right now. Enjoy.
It is the Awesemo MLB Live Before Lock show, and got an interesting slate to break down here. I already talked about it a little bit earlier in the strategy show with Terry, but get a fresh face here. I get to talk to Gundacker, so I'm pretty excited about that. We've also got Tyler, new setup. You guys can't see behind the screens, but we have his bed with no sheets in the background. Also, Tyler didn't realize, but he was counting below his camera, so I couldn't even see when the fingers were counting down. So I was kind of guessing there, but I was really interested in looking at his bed with no sheets. But Gundacker, how's it going, man?
Yeah, if I'm being honest, my bed doesn't have sheets on it, so but I don't have the camera on it, so it's a little less advertising my lack of tidiness. But I'm good. Happy Saturday.
Yeah, I like every other camera angle that Tyler. By the way, so Tyler put a background. I know he's got a llama behind him, but yeah, for the longest time we just had a background. Tyler sitting up against the wall. Now he's revealed his beautiful room to us, which is just a bed with no sheets for reasons unknown, but. Let's get into this slate. Before we get into some of the game-by-game breakdown, first, no real weather concerns for me. That is nice because that is something we've had to deal with a whole bunch recently. But other than that, what are some of the overarching views that you have on this slate heading into lock?
I think the main one is just like, man, it seems like pretty solid pitching through and through, right? There's a couple bleed spots, which unfortunately make teams even chalkier than maybe they deserve to be. But for the most part, like there's several pitchers on this slate I can get behind, and that hasn't been a luxury that we've had all week. Whether it be just rain or just poor pitching. So I kind of like how creative I can get at pitching today. And then I guess it creates a lot more inner struggle, trying to get behind a stack because there's a lot of pitchers, there is a couple of weaknesses, but a lot of these guys do have upside to, show off some run prevention. So I guess the fact that there's a solid pitching slate is, the overarching thought that I have when I look at this one.
Yeah, for sure. And it's something that we were talking a little before we started. It does feel at least that a lot recently we've had slates that have really good pitching or really bad pitching and not really that much in between. Then, the early slate today, it was like, hey, at least we have Max Scherzer pitching, and then not so fast because he ends up getting scratched and John Lester starts in his place. But yeah, a lot of slates, it's felt like as of late that there's been either really good pitching or really bad pitching, not really a clean mix of both. But, today, there is a whole lot of high-end pitchers to choose from. And I think that is where we should start because the two guys that I have the most interest in on this slate and the guys that I'm getting the most exposure to are Corbin Burnes and Carlos Rodon. So I'm going to ask you, do you agree with that? And do you have a preference between the two?
I think Rodon for me as the preference, but it's more of a coin flip than anything. But I'm in agreement with that. I also have a lot of Kevin Gausman as well. But it's nice to have a big stake in good pitchers, right? Like I don't feel that worried about them getting shelled. So I'm with you on those guys. And then, like I said, the tier below is pretty strong for the fact that it's the second tier. So so far, so good in terms of us being on the same page.
And to start with that, I'm going to disagree with you on Kevin Gausman a little bit. So we'll talk on that in a second. But I'm just going to go over some of the data we have on our top pitchers tool. That is free today over at Awesemo.com. And earlier in the day, we had very, very similar data between Corbin Burnes and Carlos Rodon in terms of them as plays. That hasn't really changed. They're still very similar in the top pitchers tool. We have Corbin Burnes, Carlos Rodon on DraftKings. Burnes a 36% chance to be a top two scoring pitcher, Rodon 32%. Then you look over on FanDuel, Corbin Burnes 14% chance to be a top scoring pitcher, Rodon 12%. Here's the difference now, though. There's been a little bit of an ownership gap that's widened between them, where early in the day they were projected within a half percentage of ownership points between them. Now we have Corbin Burnes projected for 50% ownership, Rodon projected for 40%. So with that in mind, I lean a little bit towards Rodon just because with everything else being equal for me, I'm just going to get to a little bit more Rodon because he's less owned.
Yeah, I know the White Sox are dogs here, but I feel like I trust the White Sox offense to get through a little bit more than the Brewers. But I both pitching staffs are pretty solid through and through. So that's just talking air. But the White Sox bats, I feel like long term, I like them a little bit more. If I had for FanDuel to kind of steal that win bonus.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, too, is if we do look at FanDuel just based on, and they're still the two most popular pitchers on the slate. So just kind of splitting hairs here. And they are my two most rostered players overall. I'm just kind of making a case for why I have slightly more exposure to Rodon than Burnes. And something else I'll add about FanDuel is where we also have Burnes to be a little bit more popular. Something that's nice about leverage you get from Rodon, particularly in single entry, where I assume in single entry we're going to see even a heavier gap between Burnes and Rodon, where maybe Rodon ends up being, like 20% owned and Burns maybe like 35 or 40% in single entry GPPs on FanDuel, is that if Rodon gets the win, that's a massive leverage off of Burns in those type of tournaments, because if he wins, obviously Burns doesn't. So that's a leg up on the competition there. But either way, these are my two most rostered players on the entire slate. Love both of them. High floors, high ceilings. But now let's talk about Gausman, because this is where we are going to have, it appears, a slight difference of opinion. I could see the case for Gausman, so I think I know we're going to go there. But try to sell me in the audience on Kevin Gausman as a play today.
I mean, this Pirates lineup, I got Polanco, Gamel, Michael Perez, the pitcher spot, right? Like those are 30%-ish K rates. And then Gausman just generally getting a plus park with some strikeout potential. So being sub 10K, like he's not, when I say he's my third highest, I don't mean I got like 40%. I got him about 20%. So I don't feel like I'm offering up a ton of equity, but at the moment he's my third highest owned.
So I barely have any exposure to Kevin Gausman, and it's twofold. First of all, I strongly prefer Rodon and Burns on the high end. I just think that they are better plays. The other, by the way, Gausman for sure, excellent matchup, and that is something that should be considered. But I have real concerns about the spin rate for Kevin Gausman. If you look at his last start, which was one of his worst starts of the season, his spin rate was also as low as it's been all year. And if you look at his spin rate over the last month, it's been down. So that's definitely something that is of concern for me. And then just factoring in that, he doesn't have the same track record of success as, well, actually, it's not like Burns and Rodon have been ace pitchers for, forever or anything like that. But Gausman's somebody who we've seen him pitch for a while in the big leagues, not nearly at this level. And I still think we're going to see him regress in the second half of the season. Obviously, he's not going to maintain the sub 2 ERA or anything like that. But going forward, I do have some concerns about his BABIP, for instance. 212 so far. That's not going to maintain his left on base rate. So he's stranding 86.4% of the runners to get on base against him. All in all, I think that he's still going to be a good but not great pitcher. And I just don't think he's on the same level as a guy like Corbin Burns or Carlos Rodon. They're on the slate. So I can't get a ton of exposure to everybody as much as, sometimes it kind of seems like that might be the case. So Gausman, maybe I'd be more interested in him if we didn't have Burns and Rodon to get to, but that's really where I'm at, is just there's other guys to get to. So I have a lot more of them than Gausman I have. Actually, let me look at my build right now so I give up the exact percentage I have. I currently have 5% Kevin Gausman, so hardly any compared to the top end guys. But relative to Burns and Rodon, how much Gausman do you have?
So I'm at 20% versus 40% of both Gausman and Burns. I think I have like 48% Rodon. So 20% Gausman. I didn't really look at the spin rate. I was just looking at it's the Dodgers, right? Strength of schedule. So I didn't like, I don't know. I'm at 20%.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's all reasonable. It's a really good matchup. And for all we know, last time out could be, and it's beyond just the, and I think you could also look at it and just say, hey, it was the Dodgers. We expect a bad performance, but there was just some underlying stuff that was kind of a concern for me. That and his walks have been way up as of late.
Yeah,
so
that has been, yeah.
And that's something which also he has had. 2 of his last 4 starts have been against the Dodgers. Maybe that's something that's been a little bit of a concern where he's just been cautious. But last 4 starts for Gausman, 5 walks, 2 walks, 3 walks, 3 walks. That type of stuff is just a concern for me. I could certainly see the path to upside because the Pirates are terrible, but still, it's just I prefer other guys in this price range to him. Where do you stand on Chris Bassett? Because he's somebody who I'm sure if people have been paying attention to my Bassett takes for the entire year, I've been way off on him. I've almost never rostered Chris Bassett. He's having an excellent year. He was an all-star. His numbers for you are 3.31 ERA, 3.49 expected ERA. I don't know what it is about Bassett, but every day I look at a slate where he's on, it's like, all right, he seems okay. And there's just a bunch of other pitchers I end up liking a lot better. So once again, I'm not on Chris Bassett today. How are you feeling about him?
So I kind of have that thought process you have with Gausman, where like I think he's fine, but he is 10K, and it's hard for me to get much of him versus the 10K guys. But the matchup seems pure. If he's going to strike out 1 and 4, the Mariners might offer you 1 and 4, 1 and 5. The Mariners might offer a little bit more upside. And, this might be one of those games where you go 7 innings, just a really, really deep game because the Mariners are that bad, but because of his price point and because of some of the options at that area, I start 1v1ing him versus those, like you said, the Rodons, the Burns. Like, is he really the SP3 when it's all said and done? Because that's what he is priced at. And I don't have much of it. I think I have him at 8% right now. But I like him individually. I just don't know if his fantasy output is going to be on par with a guy that's $200 more,
Yeah, out of 150 lineups, I have one with Chris Bassett right now, and that might even end up being 0 by the time I update when all the lineups come out. But like at most, it's going to be like 3 lineups with Chris Bassett, and it'll only be because his salary works with lineups I have. He's certainly not somebody that I'm targeting, but here's somebody else who I'm actually updating my lineups now. I'm trying to actively get more of, and that is Framber Valdez, who I kind of feel like is a little bit of an overlooked man on the high end of the pricing, or not necessarily high end, because he's a little bit less expensive than some of the other guys we've talked about. But Framber Valdez, he has been exceptionally good this year. I like the matchup he has today. He's not picking up that much ownership. So if I'm looking to pivot off of Burns and Rodon at the high end, the guy who I'm opting to go to is Framber Valdez, because I like the little bit of salary savings that he offers. And then also I like the matchup, and I think he's a really solid pitcher. So that is my guy who, some people might be looking at Gausman. Some people might be looking at Bassett as a pivot. To me, it's Valdez. How do you feel about him?
I think Valdez is a really fun play on FanDuel, $8,200 over there. He's a -210, so you might add in that quality start and win bonus. And then, Rangers against lefties, not really a ton of pop. Obviously, Adolis Garcia is somebody with a really, really high ISO, but he does strike out 30%. So it's a lucrative matchup if you're hunting down strikeouts. And I've got 4 guys in today's confirmed lineup: Dahl, Eli White, Garcia, and Nate Lowe, all about 30% K rates against lefties. Ironically, the rest of the lineup isn't as high as you would assume, but if half the lineup is 30%, I think Valdez can squeak out some others through some of these more contact hitters and then get a dub. So I like him, but I think at the price on DraftKings, he's not far enough from Rodon on the slate that I invest heavily into him. But I think the 8,200 on FanDuel is a nice salary retrieval to kind of help you open up your bats a little bit if you want to get a couple more high-end guys.
Yeah, and then also on Framber Valdez, currently only projected for 14% ownership on FanDuel. He comes at a unique price point at 8,200. The other guys priced around him. It is Jose Barrios at 8,400, Logan Gilbert at 8,300, Luis Castillo at 8,600. So relative to those guys, I definitely like Valdez more than them on FanDuel. So those are pretty much the top end pitchers that I'm looking at. Is there anybody else in the higher end that I guess we kind of mentioned all of them, but like Ryu's pretty expensive. I don't have any interest in him. Any high end pitchers that we've not mentioned that you have exposure to?
No, we literally hit all of the top 4. And then I think like you, I like right now in my DK build, I don't have much Valdez. I think I might have him 3%. I capped him at 8%, but only got 3. But I don't rerun the final until I get. I think I'm waiting on Dodgers and Athletics lineups. So maybe in your honor, I'll minimum at 5.
All right, fair enough. Now getting into the mid-range, there's a lot of guys that are, I think interesting. There's not any one guy that I'm massively exposed to, but there's a bunch of guys I'm kind of mixing in here. Once again, my player pool is predominantly built up at pitcher by Corbin Burns and Carlos Rodon. But the mid-range, is there any one guy who stands out to you as somebody that you do really like quite a bit?
As a pitcher, mid-range, there's a lot of these guys are tagged with high 9s, but like in the mid-range, there's not like a warm and fuzzy play. Ryu's interesting. I do like, lefties with a little bit of length and some strikeout ability against the Mets. Yesterday, Mats was fine for what he was. And I guess in the range of outcomes, there is a 30 fantasy point range of outcomes for Ryu, but it's not, in my opinion, a common range of outcomes. It might be a little bit more of the low percentile. So like maybe Ryu is somebody that deserves a little bit more interest. Like if he was 9,200, I wouldn't gawk at the price because of the spot, but it's not, no warm and fuzzies here. And then as you dig a little bit deeper, I think there's a case for Logan Gilbert. His last 2 games, 8 and 9 strikeouts. I think his strikeout prop was like 6.5, which felt a little high, but then you start looking at, he was one of their high prospect pitchers maybe starting to put it together. 100 pitch count is probably a reasonable output here. That's about what he's got in the last 3 games. Maybe Logan Gilbert under AK is a guy with enough run prevention potential, right? And get you a quality start and maybe a strikeout per inning to kind of fill a need as an SP2. It's just, I feel like today more than, the last week or so, I feel like I have a luxury of having 2 SP1s in my lineup. So I'm not getting too far deep into the mid tier, but I guess Gilbert would be somebody that if I had to grab a name at under AK, he'd be the guy I look at.
Yeah, so with Logan Gilbert, he's had exceptional results this year. The issue I have with him is just really the matchup against Oakland. I ended up with a few lineups of Gilbert right now. I have him at 7%, but 3.5 ERA, 3.57 expected ERA, strikeout stuff, 28.3% K rate. That's all well and good. It's just the matchup against Oakland that scares me a little bit. So one guy that in this price range I prefer to Gilbert on DK and FanDuel is Patrick Sandoval. And the reason is just because of the matchup against the Twins. Something we talked a little bit about on Twitter last night is both of us had bets on Alex Cobb, the over strikeout prop for him. For me, it had less to do with actually Alex Cobb as a pitcher, even though he's been overall, I think, pretty solid this year, and more to do with just this Twins lineup looks like right now. That now that they traded Nelson Cruz, who knows what other trades could be coming down the pipe also. But for now, this is the Twins lineup tonight. Polanco, Rooker, Kepler, Donaldson, Sano, and the bottom lineup, Jeffers, Larnach, Celestino, Simmons. That's a weak lineup. And if you look at our top pitchers, too, we do have Patrick Sandoval, which has a much better chance of being a top scoring pitcher than what his ownership is. So in terms of a contrarian play at pitcher, I think in general, it makes sense to go to the chalk today, but Sandoval is one contrarian option who I actually do like quite a bit, and I'm overweight too.
Yeah, his swing and strike rate is dumb. So he could definitely walk out of this game with, strikeout per inning, if not more. And he's got some bats behind him today. Ohtani's back, Walsh is back after a day off. So, maybe he squeaks out a win as well to make that 7,300 even more lucrative.
Yeah, and let's see, Sandoval. So yeah, I'm gonna try to get pretty heavily overweight to the field on Sandoval. He's actually going to be, I'm almost positive he's going to end up being my 3rd most rostered starting pitcher. Right now, I'm running one update because we got a few more lineups in, but it's going to be, it looks like Rodon for me 1, Burns 2, and then Patrick Sandoval is going to be my 3rd most rostered starting pitcher. And look, EMAC 2024. He's in the YouTube chat saying, Did I just say that Eric Lindquist is batting 9th for the Twins? Might as well be. I mean, he roots for the team. The lineup is no good whatsoever. So yeah, it is definitely something with Patrick Sandoval. Just matchup based. He's also been, pretty solid this year. So relative to the price point, I think he's in play. And then it's also a little bit of strikeout upside, like you said. K rate this year, 26.2%, high swing and strike rate. So Sandoval, that is my contrarian option pitcher today. Is there anybody that you're looking at for single digit ownership that makes sense to you?
As a pitcher, I think we really I really don't get too cute when we have the top end options, and I like the Sandoval call. I do think the strikeout potential is huge for him. Bassett, we got Bassett listed as single digit as well. And I think he's currently one of my top 4, top 5 owned. So maybe I would presume I'm way over the field on that. He's got a decent leverage rating, 13.5% top 2 optimal score versus 6% ownership. So I would parlay that with the Sandoval call.
Yeah, so Sandoval is going to be the guy for me. And just because we got a question about him in the YouTube chat, I think we should bring him up. But we had, where was it? Somebody asked, Eric Johnson. Regular watcher of the show. Appreciate you. Eric Johnson always in there asking questions, making comments. And he said, how much Walker do I have on DraftKings? I am almost 0%. So Taijuan Walker has regressed in a big way as of late. His last start was terrible against the Pirates. And did you see the play where there was like the slow dribble hit up the third baseline and he was trying to knock it foul, but he didn't realize it was fair and he just kind of like threw it into the stands. But Taijuan Walker's numbers for the year, that aside, it's more just an indication of where a season might be going right now, because he does have a 2.99 ERA, but he's a 4.06 expected ERA. And there's certain stuff with Taijuan Walker, like a 261 BABIP that I don't expect to sustain going forward. He's somebody else who's seen a dip in spin rate as of late. So Taijuan Walker, I think, is a pretty big time regression candidate. I don't have him in my player pool, and I'm looking to stack against him pretty heavily just because there is no ownership on the Blue Jays. And I think that's a good contrarian spot. But Taijuan Walker, what do you make of some of his struggles as of late?
Yeah, so that play actually reminded me of the famous David Cone play where he thought he had the runner out at first, and instead of throwing the ball home, he started arguing with the ump. It just kind of gave me flashbacks of that. Yeah, I don't have any Taijuan Walker right now. I feel like I wouldn't push back on someone who did, but I think the lineup scares me a little too much from the Blue Jay side. Even though they lose the DH spot, they still have some fun names in this lineup. And when I looked at the stack ownerships and saw what the Blue Jays were listed as, I think you just kind of mentioned that's one of your highest leverage stacks. I was like, yeah, on a slate where there's a lot of great pitching, I think the Blue Jays have the upside, as much upside as anybody else on this slate. So I'm with you. Blue Jays are one of my top 3 on the stacks, and I have 0 Walker.
Yeah, we've got Team McBee says he remembers yelling at his TV during the play. And by the way, we got Mark Curry. Looks like he might be taking little jabs at you because you got your Yankees beanie on. But he's saying, who's Chapman going to give it up to today?
Oh my God, the Yankees. So I'm focused, but the Yankees just took the lead, and it's distracting. But
whose bullpen is more inevitable to melt down right now, the Yankees or the Dodgers?
Man, I would say the Dodgers. Other than Chapman, at least some of these guys the Yankees are putting out there. Like the other night, it was literally some AAA bum, Brooks Kriske, right? Like, he's never been in that spot. But yeah, at least the Dodgers bullpen is like Kenley Jansen, and that's the guy that is getting paid to not melt down. So what are you gonna do? But yeah, it's a rough time.
Yeah, it has been no good for the Yankees bullpen or the Dodgers. The marquee teams. By the way, the Yankees and Dodgers should both have good bullpens on paper, and it has just not been the case recently. Any other pictures you want to bring up before we move over to the stacks and some of the hitters?
No, I think that's everything. I guess maybe Jose Barrios. I'd like to get your thoughts on him. He's one of my lower owned pitchers. I feel like on another slate, I might end up more on him just because how the average pitching slate is. Where did you end up landing on Barrios? I'm at 5%. I capped him at 9. I only got 5.
Let's see. I have him. I have him at 9%. Actually, it's funny you bring up that number. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy who I think just kind of where his salary works. He's in some lineups. He does look under owned to me, but still, it's just this issue of I'd strongly prefer Burns. I'd strongly prefer Rodon. If Barrios had any different ownership, I wouldn't have him at all. But just the fact that he's picking up 1% projected ownership right now, that gets me on him in a few lineups to where I'm overweight to him. But bigger context of the slate, like I don't think he's all that strong of a play. If you're somebody who plays 1, 3, 5 lineups, I wouldn't consider Barrios. Not until you're getting to like 50 plus lineups. So I think you start to put Barrios in. So very small amount of exposure to him. And it's solely based on the ownership and nothing else.
Yeah, that's fair. Like, I think we're like a different slate that doesn't have Burns, and like if there's no Burns and Rodon today, is Barrios somebody that we're at 30% probably.
Yeah, there's a good chance. And then what's funny is arguably if those guys weren't on the slate, I'd have less Barrios because then he'd be super popular. But I don't want to play a popular Barrios. So because I only have that amount of exposure to him just because his ownership is so low. So with that in mind, we could move over to the stacks. But first, today's show is sponsored by No House Advantage, bringing us prop-based contests. So we don't have to worry about salary. We don't have to worry about any of that. We don't have to worry about lineup construction. We're just building prop cards based on the props that have a No House Advantage. So you guys pick 10 props and you label them on a confidence interval 1 to 10. If you hit your 10-point prop, that's worth 10 points. So it's still GPPs. You're playing against other people, but you're just building lineups based on props. If you guys are new to No House Advantage, head on over to the site. Use the promo code Awesemo. Make your first deposit. You get a $20 instant match deposit bonus. Also, they don't only have MLB. They have NBA, although not right now. But also NFL will be coming when the season starts. PGA also. So plenty of other sports to look at over at No House Advantage. So check that out using the promo code Awesemo when you make your first deposit. So let's jump into these stacks now because I think there are some pretty interesting things that we could do with the offenses. I'm just going to lead it like this. My most exposed offense today, I kind of tipped my hand a little bit before, is the Toronto Blue Jays. The reason being, no ownership going there. I have big concerns about Taijuan Walker, given how he's looked in his last few starts. Dip in spin rate. Also, good matchups as of late. His last 2 times out, both games against the Pirates. We just talked about how bad the Pirates offense is. And Walker's last 2 starts against Pittsburgh, 2 strikeouts to 7 walks. That's massively concerning. We know the Blue Jays have a great offense. I don't think this is necessarily the most likely team to be the highest scoring on the slate, but I do think it is relative to ownership. I love that there's no ownership going to Toronto. This is one of my favorite GPP plays of the day.
Yeah, I loved them because I didn't feel like I could, at the ownership we haven't projected at, I had to do a double take. We were looking at 1.4. Like if that actually happens, that's kind of crazy considering the options we have today. So there's no reason to not take a stake there. I think that I would like a better field and maybe the DH to be involved, but I'm there. The only thing that makes it a little bit harder to get comfortable Blue Jay stacks is the fact that, our favorite 2 pitchers are 10K and we're paying 5 to 6K for some of our favorite Blue Jays bats. So you might end up with a little bit more Kevin Biggio and maybe Lourdes Gurriel than you would like, but I'm in full agreement here. I think the Blue Jays are severely under-owned projection-wise, and they could be the highest scoring team on the slate. I think Rays stand out as well, but that's not a secret. But the Blue Jays, at least in leverage standpoints, you don't have to do much equity-wise to be way over the field. I mean, way over the field, and feel like you're getting a good deal. And hey, George Springer finally getting back in that leadoff spot. 1 and 2 looking pretty deadly.
Listen, this lineup here, the most rostered player on the entire Toronto Blue Jays offense is Bo Bichette at 4% right now. We've got 1%. By the way, he's the only player even above 1%. Vlad 1%. We have George Springer 1%. Biggio 1%. All of these other guys are sub 1% on 0.5, 0.6. It is really just absurd ownership, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people are just kind of looking at Taijuan Walker and being like, okay, Taijuan Walker, sub 3 ERA, he must be good. And yeah, Taijuan Walker's had a surprisingly good season, but everything in the underlying numbers suggests it's not going to maintain. He's already started to regress a little bit if you look at his last bad couple performances. And to your point, I don't even mind some of these guys at the bottom of the lineup, like catcher, particularly on DraftKings. FanDuel, we don't have to consider catchers at all.
Right.
But at least for DK, like Reese McGuire is my most rostered catcher right now. I don't mind him at a cheap price tag. Biggio towards the end of the lineup, he's a capable hitter and he's really cheap. I don't mind Gurriel either. So yeah, I am overweight on every single player in the Toronto Blue Jays lineup. I think it's like the 3rd time in the last week this has happened to where I've been overweight to everybody in the lineup. But yeah, I love this tournament spot. I do not buy into Taijuan Walker's success from the first half of the year. And even like you said, the top of the order is really expensive. But I don't mind it. I mix and match some of those guys with the back end guys. Maybe some of those lineups also end up being my Patrick Sandoval lineups. No issue with it. And also, I do think that is one of the main things that's driving the ownership down is so many people like, I have to play Rodon and Burns, that they just aren't stacking the Blue Jays because they only want to play the most expensive hitters. But mix and match some of those cheap guys, and I don't think it's an issue. Reese McGuire, Kevin Biggio, Lourdes Gurriel, I think all of them are unowned and good GPP plays. So that is a team that I like quite a bit. But tell me, what is your number 1 most rostered stack as of now?
I'm a chalk donkey, man. I got the Rays as my highest on overall stack. Reds are creeping up on them though. I might end up swapping that, but right now I got the Rays up there.
And then, so for the Rays, let's see, I don't mind. I certainly prefer the Rays to the Reds, given the data we have on the site right now, because we have, the Rays look about appropriately owned, and they do have, I'm pretty sure last I looked, the best odds of being the top scoring team of anyone on the slate. Yeah, by a pretty wide margin. So I don't have any issue with the Rays. I get that they're popular, but it seems warranted. We have them with a 15% chance being a top stack, 15% ownership share. I have a good amount of the Rays with that information as well. I have more of the Blue Jays just based on the leverage. But yeah, I think this is a perfectly good spot for the Rays, and the ownership seems to be appropriate. So tell me, which individual hitters are you targeting there?
I got Brandon Lau as one of my highest on hitters, and then Nelson Cruz is popping for me. Mejia has some weird numbers where like his home run per 9 seems unsustainable versus his ground ball and hard contact rate. But I'm not overthinking necessarily the matchup, but you get the Rays in a park boost and dip into Mejia as if we just put him as a replacement level pitcher, 30 innings, the sample size is not too much, but the expected ERA on him is 4.5. I don't necessarily run from this pen. So I have Lau and Cruz as my top 2 owned. I'm nervous about G-Man Choi getting a little too much ownership in my player pool, because I do feel like he could be a candidate that gets swapped out by Cash. But behind those two would be Austin Meadows. And then Wander Franco. Here's a guy, it really, his overall numbers in the big leagues have not been huge, but he's still over 5K on DK. They're giving him that number one prospect price, but on FanDuel, 2,800, a much more bargain bin type of price point to kind of maybe catch a couple of ribbies in the middle of the lineup. So those are the names that stick out the most. I have probably more Choi than I should right now because I fear for his substitution later in the game.
Yeah, and that's totally reasonable. That's always something that I've had a little bit of a concern with when it comes to stacking some guys on the Rays. Is, like we saw, how many slates over the last year was like, oh, Mike Brousseau is one of the best value plays on the slate, and then he gets 2 at bats, and then it's like, oh, that kind of sucks. Or there it's like, oh, nice, my Rays stack is coming up with bases loaded, and then they pinch hit for the guy who's coming up. So overall, though, I agree. I like the Rays. But that actually is something I consider with G-Man Choi. It's something that made me lower my exposure to him a little bit. Now, we just got the Dodgers lineup in. Did you happen to see it? If not, I'll read it off to you.
I'm looking at it, but you can.
All right, do it. We'll do it for the audience. I was kind of exactly. That was what I wanted to get. I wanted to get your live reaction to this lineup, because it is. Listen, relative to the players that the Dodgers have on their roster and they could be playing, these aren't the best ones. It is, Taylor, Turner at the top. All right, that's all well and good. And then, oh boy, it goes south in a hurry, because AJ Pollock, Albert Pujols, then we've got Barnes, Noose, McKinney, Raley, and then Gonsolin in the pitcher spot. I had some Dodger stacks. I am about to roll that back. That is a bad lineup.
Yeah, I might turn Dodgers into just Justin Turner one-offs at this point. That's pretty rough. I mean, Chris Taylor. But yeah, I don't know that this team on the skid that they're on end up as 208 favorites in an hour, huh?
It's I mean, that line is definitely going to move against them. That is, I'm not sure if it's changed yet, but that is looking like a decent value right now. That's such a bad lineup. Now, just to circle back on something, does that give you any interest in potentially rostering Kyle Freeland? This is a not good lineup.
I feel like we always end up in a Kyle Freeland conversation on a different slate.
It worked the last time we did it.
Probably not in context of today's slate. Like, even if Freeland, what's a crazy number for Freeland? Is it 18? Is 18 win a tournament from him today? I guess if some 5K bats went off, I don't feel like I do that, but I could see him ground ball his way through killing a stack here and maybe eliminating the full stack Dodgers from contention. And that 5,600 on Turner. I guess Pollock's decent enough protection behind him, so I'll stick with my guns on Turner. But Turner was one of the guys I was seeking out today for a homer. But yeah, that lineup is a lot worse than I was maybe projecting. I guess Will Smith to Austin Barnes just feels
it's bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you just look at the lineup on paper, and I was about even with the fields on Dodger stacks. I had them at 6%. Like, I'm just going to lower this. I'm going to get, a couple of them just because, the matchup against Kyle Freeland still on paper is not the worst in the world, but I can't be too heavy on Dodgers given this kind of lineup. This is terrible. I'm just trying to figure out where I want to allocate this ownership to. Are you going to be making any 5-man Dodger stacks now?
No. I like Pollock for me in my mind. There's still a chip and a chair on him. Ironically, he still has a decent bomb rating for me. He's actually number 2 above Turner, but there's still some last season sample size that might be skewing this. And then, numbers against lefties don't build enough as quick sample as the righties. So I do put a little bit of a grain of salt on that. But I don't know if I can name 5 that I would be great. Like Taylor, Turner, Pollock, sure. Maybe I'm more sour on Pujols than I should be, right? Every now and then he pops one over the wall at 3.1K. And then I guess Burns is a punt catcher spot. So literally 1 through 5 if I had to, but there's no warm and fuzzies behind that.
Yeah, Albert Pujols' numbers for the year. He has a 90 WRC plus, which, that's one of his better years in recent memory. But on the whole, he's not been great for fantasy. 13 homers. So if he's going to do anything, it could be, a one-off solo homer. But
that's
I
all
have
you play him for. He's not getting triples.
So I'm rerunning this. It looks like I'm going to get to 2% Dodger stacks, and that might even end up getting cut out. This is a team that I did have a little bit of interest in, but I am going to play like 5% Kyle Freeland now, just price point at 5,400 and no ownership going there. This terrible Dodgers lineup, whatever. I think he's worth a chance as a punt play. This is not the Dodgers lineup I was expecting today. Mookie Betts, there was a chance he was going to be back today. His status is still up in the air, but also Cody Bellinger out. Like I said, Will Smith. This is not the lineup that I think the Dodgers are gives them the best chance of breaking out of their recent skid.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you got to change. Maybe this lineup will be a little bit scrappier for Dave Roberts. They've been in an incredible stretch here. And then Mookie Betts, I mean, at what point you just IL him and backdate him here? I guess they don't really need that roster spot that bad. There's a lot of teams that would have been put him on the IL for this stretch.
Yeah, I had him in my player pool. I thought he was going to be back today, but apparently not the case. So, all right, Dodgers little tangent there aside. I'm excited for them to be up, like 6-0, and then Kenley Jensen go 8 runs in the ninth inning or something like that. But that aside, let's talk about the Cincinnati Reds as a stack today, because they are massively popular, and I'm going to refresh ownership to see if we have something new that's come in. But Cincinnati Reds today, picking up 17.7% ownership as a stack on DraftKings. That is the highest on the DK slate. And then over at FanDuel, the Cincinnati Reds picking up 18% ownership, the second most popular stack behind the Rays. So now here's the difference to me between the Rays and the Reds, who are, about comparably owned. We have the Reds with an 8% chance to be a top stack compared to 16% for the Rays. That is a pretty big difference. I think the ownership on the Rays is warranted. I don't think so for the Reds, but it did seem like you were on them a little bit, so maybe you could talk me into it.
So it's a little bit more lazy analysis. When it comes to some of these parks, I just stack the ballpark. And Great American Ballpark's arguably the best park if we're chasing homers. So it's on the context of this slate where there's some really, really upper echelon pitching. I will grade the ballpark as something I'm looking after. This lineup, the non-Castellano Reds is not as fun to get behind, but there's still some bats in this lineup that can get there. Winker's on a skid, but you can sell me on India, a little bit of Votto. Tyler Naquin had a recent, I think he had a 5-hit game in the last week. So it's just more of a ballpark spot. It's not my cash game stack. I would be on the Rays for cash, but it's more of, I think in this ballpark, there's an above average range of outcomes where I would say above average versus the typical baseball game, not the slate, where the Reds put up runs here, and a few of them will be by the long ball.
Yeah, by the way, I think that you could certainly make a strong case that the Reds are going to have a big offensive game. I think if you were to ask me to make a list of the teams that were most likely to score the most runs, the Reds would be towards the top. It's just an issue of ownership for me, whereas this team is in nearly a fifth of the field is making Red stacks right now, and I just don't think those are appropriate odds relative to their chance of being the top stack on the slate. So just by my process, that ultimately means I don't get to them. I'm certainly not going to argue it isn't a good spot for them. I just think there's too much ownership going there. So that's really the concern I have for me. I would much rather get to the Toronto Blue Jays, for example, because the Blue Jays, for instance, we have with about the same odds of being the top stack on the slate. The difference between the Reds and the Blue Jays is the Blue Jays we have projected for 1% ownership with a 7% chance to be the top scoring team, whereas the Reds have an 18% ownership chance with the same odds being top scoring team. So just an ownership play that I'm getting different, and that's really it. Does the ownership scare you at all? Is there anything you're doing to differentiate those stacks?
No, this is definitely a slate where I feel like I'm way more like the field than I like to be. I know you hate chalk. I know that's what I've gathered from you. But I like I said, I do like the Blue Jays just based on the fact that I don't have to give up much equity to be 5 to 6 times the field in a spot where I think they're fine. But I still have, let me see what I ended up. Actually, I do have to remove 8% Dodgers and turn that into something. So maybe I do parlay that a little bit more. I was thinking Royals, but I had I had 13% Blue Jays versus 18% Reds. So, maybe I'll divvy that up a little bit. And it'll come a little bit more even. But yeah, versus the field, if we're trying to put some math on leverage here, if I got chalk pitchers, it got to be different with the bat somewhere. I do think the Woodford numbers, the home run per 9 so far against lefties, I feel like that's a product of low sample. Because his hard contact rate's not crazy, right? It's not elite, and then his ground ball rate significantly higher than his fly ball rate. So there is a lot of room for regression on that number, and I feel like that number could be widening a lot of eyes in terms of expectations. So there is some pushback against the stack itself, but I'm more so targeting the park, like the same with the Cardinals. Like in our normal slate, I wouldn't be huge on the Cardinals, but because it's the park on this slate, I'd take my chances.
Yeah, and I mean that's also well and good. I think that the Cardinals, to me, just for ownership reasons, I slightly prefer getting to them than the Reds. Personally, I have 0% Red stacks today. Once I think it's a good spot. It's just these are not teams that I like to target just because of the ownership. But I know you mentioned in there that you've liked some of the more popular stacks today. You also agree with me, you like the Blue Jays. But is there any other less popular stack that you do like getting to today?
Look at the ownership. I guess I'm right at the field. I'm a little bit over on the Royals. There's a lot of single-digit ownership on some. I guess the Royals, right? The Royals are single digits, and there's 4 teams at double digits. So maybe the Royals are somebody I like way more than the field in terms of numbers here. I think the Tigers are hitting that part of the year where they're just full on punting. And this has been something I target the last couple seasons, man. This Tigers pitching, and then that bullpen comes in. They test out a lot of young arms, and there's just some room for upside. And I got into a little bit of that yesterday with the Royals bat. So it's the opposite of Great American Ballpark here, but I do like 1 through 4, maybe even 1 through 5 here, even though Mize has been a lot better than recent memory. I think the Royals would kind of fit that bill for me as one of my single digit own that's not named Blue Jays.
Yeah. Hey, I don't mind that. So Casey Mize this year, he does have a 3.44 ERA, but you look at some of the underlying numbers, 4.82 expected ERA, 4.63 FIP. The other thing with Casey Mize is even though, he's a well-regarded prospect, he has really good stuff. He just hasn't had success at the big league level to this point, and he doesn't generate any swing and misses. So, we've got a guy here in Casey Mize. If you look at sports books, his strikeout prop today is 3.5 as an over/under. That is incredibly low. Strikeouts for the year only at 19.8%. We know the Royals are a team that for a long time has not struck out all that often. So yeah, I'm with you there on the Royals. It's a team that early in the day was picking up a whole bunch of ownership that's come down a little bit. So as a single owned stack, I'm also going to be on the Royals here. Any individual hitters from this team that is making into a good amount of your lineups?
Yeah, I mean, if you're sniffing out Mize's biggest weakness, it's some power to righties, almost a 50% hard contact rate this year to righties, over 40% last year. To lefties. Santana, Andrew Benintendi, and Ryan O'Hearn. Those would be some power guys that I look at for big swings. And then Whit Merrifield's just kind of a utility knife. Maybe on FanDuel is a little bit more bargain bin price at 3,400. You can get behind that. You can fill it in a util spot. He's a guy that can get on, steal some bases, but he also has with a little bit of pop. So Merrifield will always rise to the top. But if I'm sniffing out bombs, I'm looking at maybe Santana, Benintendi, or Hearn on the starting matchup. And then when this bullpen gets in, it's all bets off, man. This is one of the worst pound for pound bullpens in baseball.
Yeah, I could get on board with that. Definitely, I have more of them than the Reds per se. Just I think it's a pretty good spot for them. Casey Mize, I'm not sold on him yet. He could be a guy, a la what we've seen from somebody like Lucas Giolito, who struggled when he first broke into the big leagues, or maybe it's like Dylan Cease, who as young pitchers they didn't really have a whole lot of success, but they had good stuff they developed. I just don't think Mize is there yet. So stacking against them, that is no real problem for me. Let me look through my exposures and let me bring up a stack. Here's a team we've not brought up yet: the Houston Astros. So as for Houston, this is really just a fade on Kyle Gibson more than anything. Gibson had a terrific start to the season, no track record of success though. If you look at the last couple of years for Kyle Gibson, or even the last handful of years, his ERAs. This year, 2.86, but previous years, 5.35, 4.84, 3.62, 5.07, 5.07. So Gibson did get off to a really good start, but now he's at a 2.86 ERA this year, 3.57 expected ERA. Even though there wasn't that much in the underlying numbers early in the year to suggest he might start to struggle, last time out against the Tigers, pitched 5 innings, gave up 8 runs, gave up a home run there, only struck out 2 hitters. I think we could see Kyle Gibson start to revert into the pitcher he's been in previous seasons. So with that in mind, I like the Houston Astros stacks just because, once again, a team that isn't very popular today. And Kyle Gibson, while he does look good on paper, I just think we're starting to see the tide turning, and somebody who was a Cy Young contender now maybe starting to regress to who he actually is.
Yeah, maybe that ballpark was doing some favors so far on the road. A sub 20% K rate this year on the road, 4.3 xFIP. But and that might be one of those spots, maybe I put on the tinfoil hat, but when we think about some of the hurlers, the pitchers on the trade block, Kyle Gibson's one of them. Bad start against the Tigers. If you follow that up with a bad start against the Astros, his value might plummet. So maybe he has a quicker hook than usual, just so the administration wants to still sell him. So yeah, I'm with you on some Astros. I think the Astros are borderline stackable any slate. This projected lineup has a lot of 200, 300 ISO guys in it. I see Correa back in the mix in that 5 spot. I'd get behind that for sure. Kyle Gibson's ground ball rate maybe a little higher than we wanted, but I think the Astros have a nice mixture of power and aggressiveness on the basis with some guys like Altuve and Miles Straw that you can kind of mix it in. Like, this is a lineup where if you end up with some guys in the bottom of the order, you don't feel as scared as some of these other stacks that we've kind of discussed. So I'm fine with going after them through and through.
Yeah, and then even if you do look at Kyle Gibson, one thing about, even though his ground ball rate is pretty high, his home run to fly ball rate has been so high over the course of his career. So once again, this year, not that outlandish because he's actually pitched well to this point. But last year, 26.7% home run to fly ball rate. The year before, 20.4%. So what we've seen from him over the last couple of seasons in general is, even though a lot of his ground balls or a lot of his outs are ground balls, a lot of the balls hit in the air against him tend to be home runs, and that kind of offsets that a little bit. So Kyle Gibson's still somebody who tends to get more home runs than most ground ball pitchers. So I like the Astros for contrarian purposes. But any other stacks you want to bring up? If not, we could talk about some of your favorite one-offs on the slate.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at some of the leverage scores on our top stacks tool, I don't really see anything that's standing out to me. I mean, one of our 4th biggest leverage scores for the White Sox. I don't really see much. Are you doing any hedge stacks against your Burns and Rodon shares?
No, I've got 0% of those teams. There's times where I think it makes sense, and I get there's a lot of ownership. There's just there's a lot of low-owned offenses I like today, so I don't think there's a need to. Like, if I'm stacking the Astros, I'm stacking the Blue Jays, I just don't need to also be trying to go crazy by stacking against my pitchers because I'm already playing pretty low-owned offense. Is it something you went down and did at all?
Yeah, I don't have any hedge stacks either. I'm just curious. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if I have exposure to any bat in that game. We'll see. No.
Yeah, actually, that's going to be. Let me look through all my lineups. I mean, I'm sure, maybe not, but I would assume I had at least one hitter who made it into like one lineup somewhere. Let me look at my hitters. Do I have any? I don't see any.
Yeah.
So maybe not. Maybe not. All right. So let's talk about some one-offs. I know you mentioned Justin Turner before. So tell me maybe who's somebody who you're targeting a decent amount on this slate, and then we do some home run picks too.
Yeah, so I had a lot of Turner and Brandon Lau as 2 of my higher owned guys. These are 2 guys I was kind of got that feeling in my bad knee with the storm coming in, kind of looking at them for some power. And then Nelson Cruz is also kind of up there. I feel like these are kind of cheap calls because they're all like 5K bats here. Maybe if I maybe look at some of the more bargain bin basement guys, this happened while we're on the air, but 2K for Austin Barnes, that might actually fill a spot for me in that. Well, I guess that's a FanDuel play. I didn't see his DraftKings price. Maybe I don't throw him in the FanDuel. I like the pure punt catcher, and sometimes we get that 2K special. Miles Straw, 2K. I kind of like him. I talked about potential for him to snag a bag here and there. And then I do have a decent chunk of Alex Dickerson, I think under 3K batting cleanup. I think there's a decent opportunity for fantasy points there. And that spot, that price does offset a little bit of salary when I have the double SP1 lineups, right? The Rodons and Burns. So, but I'm really heavy on Turner, Lau, and Cruz at the moment.
Yeah, I think those are all pretty reasonable. Brandon Lau, also somebody I'm getting to a pretty good amount of. Here's somebody who, as a value play, I'm getting to a lot. I like the spot overall for the Giants offense today. And we've got Lamont Wade Jr., who's hit the ball pretty well recently, also leads off, is cheap on DraftKings. If I'm paying up for pitching a lot and I'm rostering some, fairly expensive offenses, I need to save salary somewhere. Lamont Wade leading off, we've seen him have pretty good success as of late, double-digit fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games. Lamont Wade is actually my most individually rostered hitter today on DraftKings, and Brandon Lau is second. Is Lamont Wade somebody that you have in your player pool?
Yeah, he's actually in some of my single entries. Okay. I got him at first. Yeah. This lineup has Kisner in it. I might shake that up. But we didn't mention him as a stack, but I'm looking through a lot of my quote unquote one-offs. There's a lot of Giants in there, so I maybe begrudge. I might have some Giant stacks just by substacking them for some of my main stacks here. So Wade and Alex Dickerson are both in my single entries.
Yeah, I mean, Giants is a good matchup against Will Crow. Crow has had 0 success so far this season. So pulling up Will Crow's numbers for the year, his ERA off the top of my head, his ERA and his expected ERA are both in the 6 range. So yeah, 6.12 ERA, 5.72 expected ERA for Will Crow. Strikeout stuff non-existent, 19.3% K rate. Giants, I didn't end up making a ton of Giants stacks, but like you, I do have a lot of Giants one-off. So like I said, Lamont Wade is my most rostered hitter individually. So I guess even though I'm not on 5-man Giant stacks, I am kind of high on the Giants just because, I have those. I have the Lamont Wade exposure. Mike Yastrzemski is popping up in a lot of lineups for me. I've got some exposure to Buster Posey at the catcher position. I keep expecting the Giants team is going to regress going forward, and there's been a lot of slates where I've been too light on them for that reason. But today's not going to be that day. I don't think Will Crow's capable of getting out major league hitters.
Yeah. So here's a crazy statement on today's slate when it comes to the bomb detector. The guy at the top of my bomb detector with the highest rating is Wilmer Flores.
Interesting.
It vary, right? I'm not acting on it, but mathematically my algorithm likes him for this spot. And Will Crow does allow lots of power to righties so far in his stint dating back to the 8 innings last year and the 50 plus this year. So and we can't even his hard contact rate, his ground is 32%. I can't really put a reason to why he's allowing so much power, but he pitches in PNC, so I can't even blame the ballpark. So I might have to get a little bit more Wilmer than the humanistic side of me wants, but maybe the math side says I should take some more chances here.
By the way, to answer, because Blitz had brought up in the chat, no clue how we could remember all these stats. Trust me, I do not know all of these off the top of my head. There's some that I'll just kind of be able to recall because I've been looking at them all day. But yeah, I have a million, I have Fangraphs open in front of me, Baseball Savant, and then spreadsheets with a bunch of numbers. So I'm always looking at these things. I definitely do not have all of these numbers memorized off the top of my head. That's also something that kind of makes little behind the scenes thing. It makes baseball shows a little bit trickier to do than say basketball shows. Because basketball shows, in general, we're just kind of talking about hey, this guy's injured, this guy's stepping in, this is what I think the rotation is going to be. Baseball is so much data. So I have so much information in front of me that I'm always sifting through. But yeah, I definitely do not have all this information memorized off the top of my head. Maybe Gundacker does, but I do not.
No. And there'll be a lot of times if I'm, freestyling a slate, I'm literally researching a guy on the air, right? So I don't pretend to know these hundreds of players every day.
No. And that's something I'm doing all the time too. If somebody brings up a player and says, what's your opinion on him? Then I have a general opinion. And then as I start to talk, I'm pulling up other data and starting to, look through it and say okay, here's what I'm looking for that I want to use as a talking point. But yeah, there's a lot of players in baseball. I definitely don't have all this information up off the top of my head. But listen, if you guys want to get exposure, or I guess we call it exposure. If you guys want to get access to all of the data, some of the stuff that Gundacker and I are talking about, you get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools for nearly every DFS sport out there. Signing up for an Awesemo weekly pass, that is for $29.95. However, you could also use the promo code MLB Live Before Lock. That is all one word, all capital letters, MLB Live Before Lock. That will get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. If you're only looking to play MLB, you can get an Awesemo Plus MLB weekly package for $15.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. And then you don't have to remember any of the data because it's always going to be in front of you, in front of your screen. And then there's no point where I'm like, hey, I'm just guessing what the top stack odds are. I look at it online and then it tells me, and that's the data that I use to build my lineup. So closing it on lock, but let's close out with this. I'm going to pull up the props tool that we have over at Awesemo.com. Also, if anybody has questions, feel free to fire those in and we could answer them. But heading over to the betting tool that we have over at Awesemo.com, something that I really like to use to place some bets for MLB games. It's something also we saw, like Alex the other day posted on Twitter that he was betting Jordy Mercer at minus 800 to not homer, and it caused a pretty big stink. And then I start to look at some of the data. I'm like, that's actually an excellent bet because you start to look there. Jordy Mercer's one homer over the last 2 years. The fair odds for that was somewhere around minus 1900. I was doing the math on it. So definitely something that I never would have thought of otherwise, but looking at some of these tools help. So here's the team that in our betting model, the best individual bet of the day. It is the St. Louis Cardinals at plus 160. That is a 9.6% expected ROI. Does not mean that we expect the Cardinals to win outright, but we do have them winning this game 42% of the time. That makes them a little bit of a value. So that is something to keep an eye on. Let me look at the totals. Let's see if there's any totals that really stand out now. It looks like a lot of them have moved to fair numbers. If I had to say one, though, I kind of like the Rays Indians under 10.5 runs. I'm a little scared because of the Rays offense, but it's going to be a bullpen game for Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has a really strong bullpen, so I think it could be a little hard for Cleveland to put runs up on the board. But 10.5 runs is a pretty high total. Do you have any feel on an over-under for that number?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of expectations and hope for the future Guardians. I do have a decent chunk of Jose Ramirez, but for the most part, like you said, Cash is a crafty manager. He would be a dream NL guy. He's going to bullpen it, and he's going to have guys designated for lanes. So he's going to put his best arms in best lanes and probably make like guys like Jose Ramirez at bats a little less valuable because of their opponent. So I could agree with that. Maybe I'd split that. I was going to say the Indians total was knocking on the door of 5. So maybe if I was uncomfortable with the Rays, knocking that total over 10, maybe I just bet the Indians under 5 if you can still get that. But I'm in agreement with you. I do think the Rays, I think, could shut that down.
Yeah, I dig it. I think that's a good team total to look at for sure. Because like I said, I am a little concerned about the Rays offense being so good, but really the main play that I'm making here is just that it's a good Rays bullpen going up against, a pretty mediocre Cleveland offense. So looking at some of the player props now, the number one expected ROI, this is going to make us happy. The number one player prop bet of the day, Corbin Burnes, over 8.5 strikeouts. That number could be found at plus 115. If you guys go to oddshopper.com, you could see which books are offering which lines. A good way to compare prices. How does it make you feel that we have a 47% expected ROI on Corbin Burnes to have over 8.5 strikeouts?
That's incredible. Like I would gladly sign up for that. And then, like I was looking at all those strikeout props, and some of those may be uncomfortable to bet. I hate getting into the 8s and 9s, but it makes me feel a lot better about my DFS lineups.
Yeah, I mean that's a number I would definitely be happy if we got over 8.5 strikeouts for Corbin Burnes. I would assume that that in itself isn't going to set us up with a good day, but it'd be a good start at the very least, because that is somebody who definitely is. A lot of my lineups are built around. And then as for home run props, first I'm going to ask you, what is your home run call of the day, Gundacker?
I think I'm gonna stick with like Brandon Lau.
You're not going to go with the Wilmer Flores?
Yeah, my machine loves Flores. Justin Turner. I guess I'll swap to Turner, but my machine loves Pollock and Wilmer Flores, and Wilmer's kind of the name that's really making my eyebrows rise.
So I can tell you our props model, the number one bet for home runs, and by the way, I strongly disagree with this, but it is Albert Pujols, who has he's plus 490 to homer. And I'm gonna assume this could be a little bit of a data issue because Albert Pujols isn't that likely to stay in the game for the entire time. There's a pretty good chance he gets pinch hit for at some point. So that's one of the reasons also his prop odds are a little bit inflated. And I would personally not be betting on Albert Pujols, but Here's one that is maybe a little bit more reasonable, but some of the no props, we talked about that before, but like Joey Votto is only minus 300 to not homer. So, I mean, something like that. We have Joey Votto not homering 83% of the time. So actually 10% expected ROI. I think a lot of people you see look for home run calls, but they won't try to make home run not calls like Jordy Mercer. Because, in general, a lot of people say, like, of course you don't expect Jordy Mercer to homer, but the odds don't always, match up with that kind of thing. But minus 300 on Joey Votto to not homer, I think that's a pretty solid bet. Like, Joey Votto is not some crazy power hitter.
Yeah. Woodford, like I said, small sample size on Woodford versus lefty, but yeah, Votto is more likely to maybe find one in the gap, or if he doesn't hit one into the shift, then send it over the wall.
So other than that, if you guys have questions, fire them in. But any closing thoughts on Gundacker? If not, on this slate Gundacker. If not, we could answer some questions or maybe close it out.
No, my closing thought is don't let this get to Kike Hernandez. But yeah, no, I think we're pretty well in line with most of it. It's fun to be. I like when I wish we had more resistance against each other's fudge. Thoughts on
what happened? Did Chapman give up a homer or something?
He gave up a ground rule double, which kind of saved the tie game there. But now Kiki's got two runners in scoring position with the game on the line. So. It's not going to be pretty.
Let's get a call here. So Gundacker, noted Yankees fan, right? He's got the Yankee symbol on the middle of his forehead right now. We're doing the show. Who ends up winning the game?
I feel like Kiki's going to hit a single to walk it off. Man, it's tough. It hurts. I don't expect to win these games, but it hurts when you have a chance to steal them. Like game one, I thought we could take. Yesterday, I thought we could take. It's just like these are games we could have won. I don't think we should have won, and that stings more. The fact that we could have stole it and then they get it back in the ninth. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like Kike Hernandez is probably their best guy to face Chapman and with 20 pitches under him.
Do the Yankees make the playoffs this year?
I think it depends on how quick Cashman picks up the phone. If we made the playoffs, it would be the second wild card spot, but I'm a realistic expectation kind of guy. I do think if this COVID stuff didn't happen in the last week, we'd be in a stronger spot now because missing, Judge, Higashioka, Cortez, and Loazica for the game. So, and Giovanni Urshela really, really hurt. But it's gonna be a down to the wire race. But if Cashman doesn't pick up the phone in the next week or so, I don't think so.
All right. So now here we could wrap it with this. Who is most likely to just ruin your night? Which player do you think has the best chance, whether it be a stack, a pitcher? Who is going to be somebody you are on that could kill your lineups, or somebody you're not on you think might kill your lineups, just in terms of like performing really well?
I think it could be Nelson Cruz. I love the story behind it, right? I love the power, but Nelson Cruz is definitely one of those guys. It's home run or bust, right? It's not going to get you a ton of extra bases with his speed, and he's definitely not going to steal bases. So he's just one of those heavily home run reliant guys, and I'm probably higher stake than him today than I would like to be, but it's because I'm invested in the Rays.
It's probably going to be Kevin Gausman for me, just because I'm so invested in Corbin Burnes and Carlos Rodon at the top end of the pitching tier. I didn't really get to Gausman today. If Gausman goes off and has a really big game, that would certainly not be great for my lineups, because then you'd be outperforming, Burnes and Rodon in terms of the high end of the lineup. So let's go Burnes, let's go Rodon, outscore Kevin Gausman. Other than that, guys, that is going to do it for us. Thank you to No House Advantage for sponsoring the show. If you guys are new to the site, head on over to nohouseadvantage.com. Use the promo code Awesemo to make your first deposit get up to a $20 match deposit bonus. Other than that, for me and Gundacker, good luck tonight, guys.